Chapter 359. There are actually mosquitoes in Guangzhou. This is my biggest discovery. Gradually settling down, I found that in the 2 days I was gone, the monthly vote rankings were completely red. It was truly terrifying. Everyone has a monthly vote. Are you willing to vote? Are you willing to vote? Or are you willing to vote? There were not many people in the world who had the right to worship the Qin Garden where the director of the Overwatch Council, Qin Pingping, lived. In their eyes, the Li Palace in Xinyang, the Sword Hut in Donggu City, and the Ming Garden of the Jiangnan Ming family were the three most beautiful and wealthiest privately owned buildings in the world. Of course, this ranking did not take into account the black and green royal palace in Shangjing, which was as beautiful as a celestial palace. There were nobles living in the Li Palace, and there was a great grandmaster in the Sword Hut. They were all existences far away from the common people. Only the Ming Garden not far from Suzhou and Jiangnan gave the common people a chance to admire it up close. The Ming family never used their power to bully others, and they did not purposely maintain the mystery of a noble family. Thus, many Jiangnan scholars and tourists from afar would all follow the wide road through the woods after they finished strolling through Suzhou. They would circle around to the outside of the city and look at the beautiful garden from a distance. Although they could not play up close, looking at it from a distance was enough to entertain the eyes. The Ming family was low-key and not mysterious. Thus, this Ming Garden, which had been built for nearly 40 years, still maintained the deep imprint of their family. Every brick and tile, every grass and tree, every step and pavilion, was not extravagant or eye-catching. On the contrary, it exuded a faint sense of intimacy. Furthermore, the courtyard walls built along the foot of the mountain were not very tall. When tourists stood on the road, they could see the eaves inside. If they stood closer, they could even hear the sound of flowing water inside. Intimacy did not mean homely. Simplicity, of course, was not simple. In the eyes of those who truly knew the ropes, they would certainly be able to see that every detail in this pampered garden was impeccable. Each material and design was ingenious. In the eyes of soldiers, they could see that although this garden did not seem to have any defensive capabilities, with some simple modifications, it could become a castle that could be defended for half a year in a very short amount of time. The weather was not very good. In the chilly early spring there was a light drizzle. Young Master Ming's carriage traveled alone on the road home. He did not see the usual 2 or 3 tourists and women on an outing. The carriage came to a strange stop outside the side door. Young Master Ming pulled back a corner of the curtain and revealed a gloomy face as he looked at the front door of his own home. It seemed to be sending off a guest. A middle-aged man wearing official robes walked into his carriage with a face full of anger. Ming Lansher put down the curtain and turned his head to look at Zhou Lei. He said angrily, "Speak of Guozheng, Guozheng will arrive. How can a superior like you be so tactless?" Zhou Lei was silent. Guozheng was his direct superior. Last year, he was still the imperial censor of the left of the imperial censorate in Jingdou. After the spring examination case, Guozheng had led the 3 departments of the Ministry of Justice to jointly interrogate Fan Xian. At the time, he had relied on the eldest princess to support him and had beaten Fan Xian a few times. He wanted to force a confession out of him. How could he have thought that Fan Xian's background would be so powerful? Not only did he not bring down the Fan family, but he had also offended Prime Minister Lin, the Fan family, and the Overwatch Council. These 3 giants had taken action but did not make much of a fuss. They had easily caused the Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, to lose his position. At the same time, they had sent Guozheng to Jiangnan. The biggest loss Imperial Censor Guozheng had suffered in this life was because of Fan Xian, so he had always held a grudge. Now that Fan Xian had come to Jiangnan, it looked like Guozheng wanted to incite the Ming family to oppose the imperial envoy. That was why Ming Lansher's expression was so ugly. He thought to himself that old man Guo had moved because of a personal grudge. Today he had come to his home. He was probably here to exert pressure again. "Father, I have already given the order." Ming Lansher respectfully stood at the bottom of the stone steps in a corner of the little courtyard in Ming Garden and reported into the room. The slightly tired and comforting voice of the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, came out of the room. "Good, no matter what, you have to endure this year. Not only did the people of the clan warn us not to let the government catch us, but, Lansher, you have always been calm. Now you have to be even more careful." Ming Lansher hurriedly nodded his head in acknowledgement. Ming Qingda slowly walked out of the room with a trace of tiredness on his face. "Did you see Guozheng earlier?" Ming Lansher furrowed his brows and replied, "Yes, father. If he came so openly, I'm afraid he will fall into the eyes of the imperial envoy." Ming Qingda laughed bitterly. "Never mind. The mark on our bodies is already deep enough. If we want to tear off our relationship with that side now, it is impossible. No one will believe us. Don't think about these problems anymore. Did he come himself, or did he represent those people in the capital? Ming Lansher asked hesitantly. Hearing these words, the wrinkles at the corners of Ming Qingda's eyes deepened. A moment later he sighed and said, "When will these officials have their own identities?" Ming Lansher's heart tightened. He knew the meaning of his father's words. It meant that Guozheng had come to pass on the eldest princess and His Highness' opinions. He looked at his father nervously. "Don't worry and don't pay attention to the intentions of the capital. His Highness wants us to trip up the imperial envoy." Ming Qingda, the wealthiest man of this generation, smiled coldly and said, "This is to use us as knives. How could I be so stupid? Of course, on the surface, we still have to go along with them because no one knows what will happen in the future or who will sit on that dragon chair." Ming Lansher furrowed his brows slightly and said, "The order has already been issued. As long as the imperial envoy is in Jiangnan, we will have peace. However, constantly showing weakness like this is not a solution." "It is a good solution." A faint smile rose to Ming Qingda's face. "Commissioner Fan is not a demon who eats people without spitting out the bones. Since he can't openly hold anything against us, he also has to be wary of the backlash from the Jiangnan officials and gentry, so he can't just bring a bowl of water and swallow us whole in one gulp. If we are more well-behaved and give him enough face, presumably he will also give us some face. This Sir Fan Jr. doesn't even give the second prince face," Ming Lansher said with a pained smile. Ming Qingda smiled self-mockingly and said, "The identity of a merchant has always been on the level of history, but now it is the exact opposite. Sir Fan is the son of Lady Yi. Looking at his actions, he has always harmed officials but not the people. He also has no prejudice against merchants. He doesn't give the second prince face, but that doesn't mean he won't give us face. When all is said and done, no matter how the second prince retaliates, he is just setting a trap for him in the officialdom. We have the ability to move the power of the people. Of course, as long as the situation has not developed to the point where blades meet, we must not provoke him," Ming Qingda said. Ming Lansher was a bit annoyed. These few days, he didn't know how many times his father had said that his father's behavior on this matter was overly cautious. It made him feel uncomfortable. Although he understood the reason, he still found it difficult to accept. Seeing the faint worry on his father's face, he couldn't resist comforting him. "Father, if it really can't be done, let's stop." The top and bottom of the stone steps were silent for a while. Ming Qingda, the wealthiest person in Jiangnan, slowly shook his head. A moment later, a severe light flashed through the eyes of this nearly 50-year-old elder. "There are some things that I cannot stop just because I want to." He immediately smiled coldly and said, "If I stop, what will the tens of thousands of people in the clan eat? Don't forget that the nobles in the capital have so many shares. Even if we don't do it, will they not stretch out their hands to ask for silver from me? The eldest princess, the crown prince, the second prince, and a few large families in the capital have gotten used to eating us. If we really stop this time, who knows what they will do. Never underestimate the greed of the royal family and officials." Ming Lansher gazed at his father and a glimmer of sympathy flashed through his heart. Who knew that the richest man in Jiangnan also had all these things he had no choice but to do? Ming Qingda said with a face full of hatred, "The Ming family appears to be doing well, but in reality, we are just an old hen that can lay eggs in their eyes. If the old hen doesn't lay eggs, those who originally supported us will probably want to kill us even more than the imperial envoy and finally eat a delicious meal of chicken." The hatred on Ming Lansher's face was immediately hidden. He cursed in a low voice, "If it wasn't for the fact that those people in the capital eat too much silver each year, we would be able to properly sell the palace treasury's products. It wouldn't be much worse than it is now. Even if the palace treasury is cut off by the imperial envoy, our family's businesses throughout Jiangnan will still be able to keep the clan going." Ming Qingda waved his hand, indicating that he should stop talking about this topic. He smiled coldly and said, "These years, the Ming family has been doing shady business to fill those people's appetites. Perhaps Sir Fan Jr.'s trip to Jiangnan this time is a chance given to me by the heavens to let me escape from those matters. Starting from this year, we will gradually reduce our share of entering the capital. The eldest princess and the others will not be able to say anything. As long as the winning bids this time are no less than 60% of last year's, it will be fine. Don't be like the Chui family and suddenly collapse. Speaking of doing proper business, do you think the Ming family cannot do it?" Ming Lansher bowed slightly and said, "Father is right." He had given up on the smuggling route to Dongyi and cut off his family's overseas pirate branch. This year they would probably earn less silver outside of their accounts. They still had to pay dividends for those shares in the capital. This way, at least for this year, the clan would definitely lose money and would have to use their capital to fill in. If the imperial envoy stayed in Jiangnan, would they have to keep filling in silver? Even if they had great wealth and power, they would not be able to stop ants moving a mountain. Knowing what his son was worried about, Ming Qingda did not want to explain or comfort him too much because reality was like this. If the Ming family wanted to separate themselves from the past and protect themselves, then they had to pay the price of these 2 years. Speaking of the matter of the palace treasury opening bidding, Ming Lansher thought for a bit and then quietly said, "I have met with everyone these 2 days." The everyone, in these words, referred to any of the famous merchants in the Jiangnan area who had the power to participate in the palace treasury bidding. He continued to report, "I have asked a few familiar families. The Xiong family of Lingnan and the Sun family of Chuanzhou all know about the current situation. Although it looks like they are eyeing the palace treasury's marketing rights, their target is still the portion left behind by the Chui family. They have also promised me that they will not raise the price against us." Ming Qingda nodded and said, "Every family wants a piece of this golden rice bowl. However, since we have arranged things first, it is not good for them to openly oppose us, unless they don't want to do business in Jiangnan anymore." Speaking of this, only now did the master of the Ming family faintly reveal a glimmer of the confidence and pride that the richest man in Jiangnan should have. "The key is those salt smugglers." Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly and said, "Those salt merchants are all ruthless characters who fish for money between life and death. They also have plenty of spare money on hand. If they participate in the bidding, it will be troublesome. Although we are not afraid, we will have to fork out a bit more silver. The court rules are very strict, 40% of the deposit." He shook his head and said, "It takes up too much. I'm afraid we won't be able to make up for it in the first half of the year." The wealthiest in Jiangnan were the so-called royal merchants and salt merchants. The two sides had originally minded their own business, but now that the Chui family had fallen, who knew whether or not those salt merchants would be eyeing the palace treasury business? Those salt merchants had a lot of money in their hands and they also had backers in court. The Ming family was faintly worried about this. "I have visited all of these salt merchants in Suzhou." Ming Lansher thought of what he had seen and heard these 2 days and replied with some surprise, "They were very straightforward. They said they would definitely not enter the doors of the palace treasury this year. I don't know what is going on." Ming Qingda was slightly startled. He thought for a moment and then understood what was going on. He laughed self-mockingly and said, "It looks like everyone knows that Sir Fan Jr. is adjusting the channels to leave the palace treasury this year, so no one dares to fight for this bowl of rice at the first opportunity. They are waiting to see how we and the imperial envoy end things. It looks like those salt merchants are preparing to enter again next year." Ming Lansher raised his head and furrowed his brows. "Those salt merchants? They don't seem like people who are so overcautious. Who is their backer?" Ming Qingda smiled coldly. "Our Jiangnan Road official Shueqing, Sir Shui. Shueqingda knows what Sir Fan means. At least in this first year, he will suppress the salt merchants and not let them enter the palace treasury to cause trouble for Sir Fan. This is the face Sir Shui is giving to Sir Fan Jr., the old Minister Fan in the capital, and the director." Ming Lansher was silent and speechless. "That's fine." Ming Qingda thought for a moment and then said, "Being suppressed by the imperial envoy's heavenly might, no one will enter the chaos. It will be easy for us to plan. As long as we get the bidding document and get through this year safely, it will be fine." "The imperial envoy will let us?" Ming Lansher asked his father probingly. Ming Qingda said, "As long as everything is done openly, why should we be afraid of the imperial envoy? When it comes to business, he will never be as good as us. Regarding the palace treasury opening bidding, the highest bidder wins. If someone from the palace comes, Jiangnan Road will be watching from the side. It is not something that the palace treasury transport company can handle. As long as the Ming family is willing to pay the silver, Sir Fan Jr. can't force it out of me. What I mean is, will the imperial envoy secretly incite other families to purposely raise the price? This is the simplest move. They won't lose anything, but they can make us suffer a great loss." Ming Qingda shook his head confidently. "There may not be anyone on the Jiangnan Road who dares to offend Sir Fan Jr., but other than him, there may not be anyone who dares to offend the Ming family. You also went to ask around earlier. Some of the more powerful families should be watching from the side this year. If he wants to find a puppet to raise the price," Ming Qingda furrowed his brows. "Bidding requires clear silver. The imperial envoy doesn't have that much silver, so he won't be able to raise it much. A faint mockery rose to his face. Don't be blinded by that chest of 130,000 liang of silver. If he wants to use silver to smash people, the officials won't be able to do it. When it came to using silver to smash people, it was the Ming family who did it the most shockingly. Thousands of images, swallowing the wind and clouds. In one go, they threw out 400,000 liang of silver with the intention of knocking Fan Xian unconscious. Although they didn't succeed, this kind of boldness was not something that the bribers in the capital could touch. The imperial envoy's father, Sir Fan Sr., is the Minister of Revenue of the Qing court. He manages the national treasury, Ming Lansher reminded with a pained smile. Ming Lansher forced a smile and reminded him, speaking of silver, his silver is much more than the Ming family. Minister Fan? Ming Qingda said with slight mockery. If the Ministry of Revenue doesn't move, then so be it. If the imperial envoy uses his father's power in order to suppress the Ming family, then this matter will be interesting. Trust me, the eldest princess has been so quiet. She must be waiting for that moment. Ming Garden immediately fell silent. Ming Lansher felt a slight chill in his heart. He knew that although his father appeared to be retreating step by step, he had long discussed with the nobles in the capital how to deal with the imperial envoy. No one knew how much blood and danger were hidden in the background of the palace treasury bidding. The matter involved the national treasury and the minister. Ming Lansher did not dare continue this topic that could not be said out loud. He calmly changed the topic and reported, based on past practice, the Taiping Money House's silver has already been prepared. Father has repeatedly warned us, so we have prepared an extra 30% of the silver this time in case we are caught unprepared when the bidding comes. The palace treasury bidding used clearly marked silver. Putting aside the 40% down payment after the deal was closed, the bidding silver itself had to be prepared in advance. Whether it was real silver or banknotes from a money house approved by the court, it had to be delivered to the special meeting place on the day the bidding opened. This was a terrifyingly large sum. For a wealthy family like the Ming family in Jiangnan, it would be difficult for them to immediately take out so much silver. After all, they could not sell land or homes. Furthermore, 60% of the bidding silver could be immediately returned after winning the bid. Royal merchants did not want to take up cash flow, so they would borrow it from outside. For large families like the Chui and Ming families, they needed a lot of silver each year during the bidding. They all used Taiping Money House to raise silver. Using produced goods as collateral had already become a custom. This year, they predicted that the palace treasury opening would be troublesome. Fan Xian would certainly think of a way to make the Ming family bleed more. Thus, the Ming family had the Taiping Money House prepare an extra 20% of the banknotes. Do not underestimate this 20%. The base number was too large. 20% was already a terrifying sum. It made the Ming family pawn off a lot of things. Taiping Money House can be trusted, Ming Qingda said in a low voice. It is an old relationship. After all, it is a business of Dongi. Those people will have to rely on us for supplies. Yes, Ming Lansher replied quietly. Ming Lansher quietly replied, furthermore, we are not moving silver for no reason. Nowadays, there are always some supercilious people in Jiangnan who want to see the Ming family make a fool of themselves. If we can win the bid this time, it will be a slap to their faces. At the same time, it will let the imperial envoy understand that the family that can represent the palace treasury in such a large business is still our family. Ming Qingda glanced at him with praise and said, that is exactly what I mean. That is why we must accept this bid. The system of the court requires such a large sum of silver to be placed on the transport company. The original intention is to get rid of merchants who do not have enough power. At the same time, it also helps the Ming family sweep away a lot of opponents. Of those who can move so much silver, one family has already fallen. Who else can? Unless the imperial envoy wants to see no one take over the palace treasury goods next year. Otherwise, you can only give it to me. What we have to ensure is, first, the price not too ridiculously high. Second, the binding. There will be pressure from the capital to force the transport company to follow the rules of previous years. The 16 items will be split into 4, 6, 8, and 1. We still only want that 8. The master of the Ming family still said only want for half of the shares. The confidence in his words was unmistakable. Ming Lansher accepted wholeheartedly. The seemingly tense situation became easy under his father's analysis of the system of the court. It seemed that only his family had the ability to win the bid under the absurd rules of the court. The matter on the sea has been settled. the master of the Ming family finally said slowly. You should also have that person in the family shut up. Hearing that the matter on the sea had been settled, Ming Lansher couldn't help but feel his entire body relax. That was the Ming family's biggest weakness. As long as it was cleaned out, based on the Ming family's stable actions in Jiangnan Road, Fan Xian should not be able to find any reason to oppose him. However, hearing his father's last words, the young master of the Ming family still could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He didn't know how his father had settled the matter on the sea or how the pirates entrenched on the island had been silenced. As for the Ming family's support, a portion of it had come from the military. His father was very tight-lipped, so even he, the young master of the Ming family, did not know which side of the military the capital had mobilized this time. The matter on the sea had been resolved by his father, but he had to resolve the matter at home. A ruthless expression flashed across Ming Lansher's face. Nightfall. The young master of the Ming family was in a remote golden room in Suzhou. He lay on the bed with his eyes gazing at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking. In his arms was a naked woman lying obediently like a kitten. Her slender fingers drew circles on his bare chest. This woman was Ming Lansher's third concubine. Because of her special identity, she had always been raised outside of Ming Garden. Lansher. The concubine's breath was slightly warm. She panted and said, I want more. Men hated to hear these words after the matter. Ming Lansher smiled coldly and said, Want more? Don't you know how to be content? The concubine's expression suddenly changed. She gritted her teeth and said, What do you mean? Is it that the imperial envoy is checking hard and doesn't dare to go out on the sea? Do you feel that us two siblings are of no use? Ming Lansher smiled slightly and turned around. In a quiet voice he said, Little darling, you've earned so much silver for the Ming family these few years. How could it be of no use? As his words fell, his hand slapped heavily onto the concubine's snow-white buttocks, sending up and down white waves. She pouted coquettishly. The concubine's eyes were like silk and filled with anticipation. Ming Lansher's face was full of smiles. He chopped down on the back of her neck and watched as the concubine fainted with a moan. He then used his own hands to steadily and mercilessly grip the snow-white neck that he had kissed countless times. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 360. In the early morning of the second day, a large stone and a sack were missing from the pier outside Suzhou. Someone heard the sound of a heavy object falling into the river. Immediately afterwards, they heard that the young master's third concubine had returned to her home in Chuanzhou to visit relatives. It was unknown when she would return, and the date of her return was uncertain. In the same dusky morning mist on an island far away from Chuanzhou City, taking advantage of the cover of the night before dawn, many ferocious bird-eating seagulls rushed down from the clouds and landed on the island, densely covering the entire ground. These seagulls greedily lowered their heads, using their blood-stained beaks to peck and tear at something. Because there were too many birds, the fight for food was especially violent. From time to time, seagulls would wantonly bite each other in order to fight for food territory. For a moment, the dusky island's surface was filled with bird feathers flying chaotically, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. What they fought for food was not the young birds and turtle eggs that they normally enjoyed, but human corpses. The entire island was actually littered with corpses. The pungent smell of blood rose into the sky. Fortunately, it was early spring, so there was not too much of a rotten smell. But even so, with so many corpses, it still attracted the attention of many seagulls within a radius of several hundred miles. What a feast! On the island, one could faintly see a pier-like building, but right now there were no signs of people. The dead people had their eyes wide open in fear, their white eyeballs unable to move, covered in a layer of mucus formed after death. It seemed that they never thought that someone would come to the island and kill them. With a chee sound, a seagull accurately pecked at the eyes of the corpse that could not close their eyes. With a bloody eyeball in its mouth, it proudly twisted its neck, and then immediately lowered its head, as if afraid that its companions would fight with it for food. Spreading its wings, it moved to another place, hiding under a reef, and began to eat. But it found that this food was a bit hard, and it grabbed its neck, anxiously cackling. The island was covered with corpses, flesh flying to reveal white bones, internal organs pecked out, blood, death, flying, fighting flocks of birds, the aura of death and fear pervading the sea. With one hand, he pushed the corpses above him away with some difficulty and carefully chased away those damned seagulls beside him. A pair of eyes nervously peered out from the gap. After confirming that the group of soldiers had left by ship, this island pirate who had survived the disaster crawled out of the corpses of his companions with lingering fear. The man had been stabbed in the shoulder and was badly mutilated. If it were not for his identity, which allowed him to sense the murderous aura of the soldiers very quickly and pretended to be dead and used the corpse of his comrade to cover himself, he might have died long ago. The soldiers who had come to the island should have been the pirates' companions, but they suddenly became violent. The viciousness of their actions was difficult to describe. It was not until everyone on the island was dead that the leader of the pirates realized that the Ming family had come to silence them. The person who had luckily escaped had a dark complexion. It was obvious that he had lived on the sea for many years. His face was normal, his expression was determined, and his eyes were slightly narrowed. After experiencing such a disaster, he did not seem to panic. He panted as he sat among the corpses of his companions, forcing himself to calm down. He tore off the clothes of his companions beside him and tightly bandaged his own wounds. Then he began to get up and search for fresh water and food on the island. When the soldiers left, they thought everyone was dead, so they did not destroy the water and food. They gave him a chance to live. After he recovered his spirit, the sky brightened. Facing the rising sun, the man slowly sat on the dock and looked at the flock of birds that flew and landed not far away. He looked at the wretched appearance of his companions who had been with him for many years after their deaths. His lips began to turn white, but he resisted the urge to vomit. With a flip of his hand, he picked up a jug of water and poured it into his dry mouth. The people who had died were all his companions, but he would not bury them. For one, too many people had died. It was impossible for him to bury so many bodies by himself. For pirates, if they could not be buried in the sea after they died, it was not necessarily a bad ending for them to be taken into the sky by these seagulls. Thirdly, these pirates had done a lot of evil in their daily lives. Murder and rape were common occurrences. Now that they had been killed by people and then eaten by birds, it could be considered retribution. He was called Qinghua, a native of Chuanzhou. His family background was ordinary and his ability was ordinary. He spent his years on the sea as a sailor. Sometime last year, the large ship he was on was robbed by pirates. He didn't know what method he used to luckily survive. Furthermore, he joined the inner circle of the pirates and began to become partners with them. On the roaring sea outside Chuanzhou, he did those ugly things. The pirates on this island were the largest on the sea, but strangely they did not do much business. Furthermore, the leader seemed to be purposely hiding the movements of this group. After staying on the island for half a year, Qinghua finally discovered that the main business on the island was robbing the Ming family's cargo ships heading to the Western Ocean. Each time they robbed a ship, they did not leave anyone alive, particularly the court officials responsible for escorting the ships. In just half a year's time, because of Qinghua's cool-headedness and cold-bloodedness, he received the appreciation of the leader and became a small leader among the pirates. He began to gradually understand more details and began to have the opportunity to come into contact with some very important matters. Unfortunately, at this time on this night, a group of powerful navy found the small island and slaughtered everyone on the island in an incomparably bloody manner. The morning sun brushed against his face, but it was not refreshing because he was surrounded by dead bodies and flesh. Qinghua's throat gurgled. He recognized the pirate not far in front of him who was being eaten by birds on his thigh. It was Kai Zi, who lived in the same cave as him. Qinghua's eyes blinked weakly and stood up with some difficulty. He walked to the side of Kai Zi's body and used the wooden stick in his hand to chase away the wretched seagulls. Looking at Kai Zi's body, he was speechless for a moment. In the end, he slowly said, "If I go back alive, I will take good care of your parents." After saying this, he decisively threw down his comrade's body and followed the hidden little path under the dock in another direction. The ships on the island had all sunk, but the pirate leader had left a backup plan there. He didn't know if the wooden boats were still there. Qinghua did not walk quickly, but he was particularly determined. He had to quickly return to land. Although he had survived, the subsequent reports had not been sent out. The commissioner's side should already be anxious. As he walked, he wiped away his tears and forced himself not to turn his head to look. Although the pirates behind him all had their own paths to death, after being together for half a year, even if he had a heart of stone, he still couldn't help but have some feelings. At this moment, a flame of anger rose in Qinghua's chest. He was about to get proof that the Ming family was colluding with the pirates. That group of soldiers last night had a powerful battle power. Just which faction did they belong to? Since they had come to the island to silence witnesses, It had to be some big shot in the military who could mobilize the powerful navy along the coast. Was it the Yi family? However, he did not have the right to make a judgment. He only hoped to quickly send this report back to Suzhou. The crying Qinghua was one of the 5 crows of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Quanzhou. He was the secret agent who had once reported to Fan Xian the connection between the Ming family and the pirates. Far from this bird island, outside Suzhou in Jiangnan, in the beautiful Ming garden that seemed unwilling to be tainted by a trace of the secular world, the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, was standing respectfully in front of a chair and replying to the question of the person in the chair. The person in the chair was a woman, an old woman. Even in front of the eldest princess, Ming Qingda had no need to be so reserved and courteous. In front of this old woman he had to lower his head because this old woman was the true most powerful person in the Ming family, the matriarch, his birth mother. Many years ago, if this old woman had not been vicious and merciless, poisoned the most favored mistress to death, and then chased the 7th prince out of the family after the old master's death, the Ming family's large fortune would probably have long fallen into that person's hands. What share would Ming Qingda have? Each time Ming Qingda looked at his old mother, he could not think of the words old and virtuous. Instead he thought, being old and not dead is a thief, my 7th brother's body has probably already turned to white bones somewhere. Although he felt at ease, he also felt a chill. As long as this old woman was alive, he could not be considered the true master of the Ming family. Your actions are too slow. The old Ming matriarch looked at her son and said in a cold and merciless voice, if you wanted to wash yourself clean, then you should have started acting 2 years ago. Ming Qingda was known to be intelligent, otherwise he would not have been able to control such a large business of the Ming family. However, in front of his mother he had been criticized badly. His face heated up and he furrowed his brows. Why 2 years ago? Because 2 years ago, the palace decided to have Fan Xian marry Lin Wanner. A cold light flashed through the old woman's eyes as she spoke in a hateful voice. Ming Qingda's expression was respectful, but he had other thoughts in his heart. Even if they had guessed at that time that Fan Xian would go to Jiangnan to take charge of the palace treasury, who knew he was the emperor's illegitimate child? Who knew he was a descendant of the Yi family? Who knew he would one day lead the Overwatch Council? This old woman, it looked like she was truly muddle-headed. The old woman scolded, if I hadn't asked the military for help this time, if the Overwatch Council had found that island, given Fan Xian's personality, how would he have dealt with you? Ming Qingda laughed coldly in his heart and didn't say anything. With a respectful expression, he replied, it is truly unfilial of me to make mother worry. To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 361. Time is very messy right now, so it is even messier. P.S. After lunch in the underground tunnel, I saw a few people playing chess to swindle money. I saw one person fall for the trick and move a chess piece. I spoke too much and was glared at by the hidden chess piece. I am not in a good mood and feel inferior because I don't know how to use tyrannical jinchi. These chapters are instructions. I want to learn this writing method. I don't know how it will turn out. How is Lanshi today? The old Ming matriarch looked at her son coldly and was concerned about her grandson. Ming Qingda narrowed his eyes and said, the child knows what is important. Besides, he has treated her well these few years. Men, the old Ming matriarch said mockingly. In the end they are all like this. The old woman thought for a bit and then shook her head. Have Lanshi have less contact with Master Yuan? A few days ago, I heard that the Imperial Envoy student was opening a brothel in the city. Lanshi sold the bamboo house and felt uncomfortable. He was planning with Master Yuan on how to break the Imperial Envoy's business. Since we have drawn up the rules, of course we cannot do the opposite. She continued coldly, Master Yuan is the heir's woman. Have Lanshi drool less. Besides, it's not like you don't know that the Fan family hates Yuan Meng to the bone. If Fan Xian discovers that Yuan Meng is in Suzhou, he will probably kill her at the first opportunity. If Ming Shi interacts with her, it will be a bit more dangerous. Ming Qingda nodded his head in agreement and was about to leave the room when unexpectedly his old mother still kept him. After a moment of silence, she asked worriedly, our arrangements are, in the end, our arrangements. I feel that after Sir Fan Jr.'s iron hand rectified the palace treasury, he shouldn't be so quiet. Ming Qingda thought for a bit and then replied calmly, Mother, don't worry. After all, our family is a large family with a reputation under heaven. Without concrete evidence, Even an imperial envoy would not dare to act recklessly. The old Ming matriarch's eyebrows were all white. Her wrinkled face was filled with worldliness and coldness. In a cold voice she huffed, "Don't dare? He doesn't even want 400,000 liang of shining white snow silver. He must want even more. Other than the Ming family, who else in this world can give him so much silver?" It was indeed so. To raise 400,000 liang of silver in such a short amount of time and deliver it to Fan Xian's hands, this kind of ability was enough to shock the world. Although Fan Xian incredibly did not accept it, this could be called the largest bribe in the world. It could already be recorded in the annals of history. Fan Xian didn't even want 400,000 liang of silver. Naturally, what he was after was even greater. "I have thought about it," Ming Qingda said unhurriedly. "The imperial envoy not taking money is not necessarily a bad thing. Last September, the Chui family sent 20,000 liang of silver to Yisher Tavern. Sir Fan Jr. kindly accepted it, but as soon as he turned around, the Chui family was wiped out. So, whether or not he accepted the silver does not mean this strange sir has any thoughts. Since ancient times, accepting silver to do things was a matter of course. Fan Xian accepting 20,000 liang of silver from the Chui family, not only did he not give them any benefits, but he also struck like lightning and toppled the Chui family. This action completely destroyed Fan Xian's reputation on the Jianghu for bribery. The Jiangnan merchants bore a deep grudge against this matter. The old Ming matriarch's cheeks were weak. When she smiled, they appeared particularly terrifying. She mockingly said, "The Chui family is also petty and can't even see things clearly. Their precious son offended Fan Xian in Shangjing in northern Qi and was punished to kneel in the middle of the night. They want to use 20,000 liang of silver to smooth things over?" Sir Fan Jr. did not accept this silver to do things for the Chui family. He only expressed that he no longer bore a grudge against the Shangjing matter. As for what happened afterward, who knows what happened. Speaking of this, the old woman furrowed her brows and asked, "How is Huir?" Ming Qingda replied, "Her mood is better." Under the eldest princess's secret arrangements, the Chui and Ming families were carrying out a marriage alliance. The Huir mentioned now was the wife of the third generation of the Ming family, Ming Lansher Chui Zhihui. After the Chui family had been toppled by Fan Xian, although those prominent figures had survived under Yan Xiaoyi's protection, their families had been destroyed and their people scattered. Qin Guan had left in a romantic manner. The bride who married into the Ming family could not help but feel terrified and wash her face with tears every day. After talking about some family matters, the old Ming matriarch brought the topic back to the main topic. She narrowed her eyes and said, "The shopkeeper of Taiping Money House came to say earlier that the silver our family has deposited is pretty much all prepared this time. However, a few days ago you came to tell me about Zhaoshang Money House. What is its background? How come I've never heard of it?" "I am a bit worried about Taiping Money House," Ming Qingda furrowed his brows and said. "The Shi Chanli you mentioned earlier, I heard he had withdrawn a few large sums of silver from the money house. If the court or the imperial envoy has done something, I'm afraid there will be some problems." He saw that his mother did not say anything and was deep in thought. He then continued, "Zhaoshang Money House is a new one. It only appeared in Dongyi last year. As you know, most of the money houses nowadays come from Dongyi. I've asked someone to investigate the shares and background behind them. There shouldn't be any problems. What I am thinking is that if the price of the palace treasury bidding is raised by the imperial envoy, there must be a guarantee of future cash flow. Other than Taiping Money House, there must be another way out." The old Ming matriarch opened her eyes and smiled coldly. "What kind of background makes you believe it so? Our family does palace treasury business, and the silver we need is like flowing water. How can a small money house be in such a rush? Fan Xian going to Jiangnan actually messed up your thoughts. You really don't have much of a future." Ming Qingda's heart was slightly angry, but he still maintained a smile on his face. He explained, "The main thing is that the background is reliable. Guess who is behind that Zhaoshang Money House? Don't try to be mysterious with me." The old Ming matriarch glared at her son with disgust. Ming Qingda coughed and said, "I've investigated clearly. Most of the shares in Zhaoshang Money House belong to the Shin family. The northern Qi court chased after them very hard. Back then, the Shin family's money manager fled to Dongyi. Only then did he start this business." "The Shin family?" A glimmer of interest finally appeared in the old Ming matriarch's eyes. "The provost of the Northern Qi Discipline Commission, Shin Zhong?" "That's right." The old Ming matriarch was silent for a moment and then smiled dryly. "The Northern Qi court confiscated the Shin family. Young Lady Xin fled alone, and there has been a sum of wealth that has not been confiscated. Back then Xin Zhong and the Cui family worked together to control the palace treasury smuggling to northern Qi. Who knows how much silver was saved? If it was his family, then this money house does have some financial power. Most importantly, Zhaoshang Money House's true backer is a very powerful family in Dongyi. Ming Qingda struck while the iron was hot. Xin Zhong was killed by the northern Qi emperor. Furthermore, it should have something to do with Sir Fan Jr., so Zhaoshang Money House would certainly not communicate with the court and northern Qi. Other than the large amount of silver hidden in the Ming family's fields and manors, most of the silver used for business was stored in Taiping Money House. The seal to transfer money from Taiping Money House had always been in the hands of the old Ming matriarch. Ming Qingda had the title of master of the Ming family in name, but in reality he was just a puppet. Today he was trying his best to recommend Zhaoshang Money House to his mother. Who knew what he was thinking? He didn't know if the old Ming matriarch had sensed her son's thoughts, but her smile instantly disappeared. She coldly said, "Did you not find out how much money Shi Chanli was able to move from Taiping Money House?" Ming Qingda felt a thread of cold sweat trickle down his back. He forced himself to be calm and said, "Taiping was forced by me. Their old shopkeeper had no choice but to break the rules and give me an actual number. I'm not sure where the silver Shi Chanli was able to get came from, but it should be from the Fan family. The total number should be around 50,000 liang." The old Ming matriarch huffed coldly and didn't speak. She only stared at her son. Ming Qingda became more and more nervous. After an indeterminable amount of time, the old Ming matriarch sighed and said, "Let's not rush to contact Zhaoshang. First, Shi Chanli doesn't have much silver to move. It's not enough to make trouble for us with the bidding. Second, behind Taiping Money House is Sigujian, that strange old creature. What this money house cares about the most is credibility. If you let them break the rules, that is because Sigujian needs the Ming family to send goods to Dongyi. If you turn around and start flirting with Zhaoshang Money House, how could they feel comfortable? Third, even if Zhaoshang Money House has the Xin family's money behind it, it actually doesn't amount to much. Even if there are the large clans in Dongyi you spoke of, Dongyi is also very chaotic. The so-called large clans are probably a thorn in Sigujian's side. Why should we offend Sigujian?" Ming Qingda raised his head as if he hadn't expected his mother to speak to him so warmly. The old Ming matriarch finally came to a conclusion. "We can have some small dealings with Zhaoshang Money House. As for the palace treasury, we must still go through Taiping Money House to be on the safe side." Ming Qingda didn't say anything more. He always felt that behind his mother's warmth hid a knife that could kill without seeing blood. However, he was still not satisfied in his heart. In doing business, capital was important. If everything was placed in Taiping Money House, how could that work? There was a slight deviation in the judgment of mother and son. It was this deviation that led to the troublesome matters later on. "If the imperial envoy can tolerate our family for a few years, then we will do as you say and continue like this. If he must destroy the Ming family, you know what to do." Ming Qingda bowed his head in acknowledgement. After a moment of silence he said, "The Juanshan conference is next month. I'm afraid there won't be enough time." The old Ming matriarch looked at him coldly. Killing people is not an urgent task. As for the Juanshan conference, the Ming family has raised the Jiangnan martial world for so many years and protected them under the eyes of the court for so many years. Shouldn't they have some repayment? The killing people in these words referred to killing Fan Xian. The Juanshan conference was definitely not the martial arts conference that Zhou Lei had once wanted to use against Fan Xian. There were so-called Jianghu in the Qing kingdom, but the true Jianghu was definitely not like the plain beside West Lake. There were so-called aces in the wilderness. Aces at the level of the old Jiangnan water bandits were hidden in who knew how many places. The so-called Juanshan conference was the true gathering place for these so-called aces of the Jianghu. The Juanshan conference was never known by others. No one knew exactly how powerful it was. If Fan Xian truly wanted to exterminate the Ming family, a large family that had lasted for hundreds of years would naturally have a way to counterattack. Particularly at the moment, the shadows and professional assassins of the 6th Bureau were all over Jiangnan playing hide-and-seek with the Dongyi swordsmen. The defense around Fan Xian was not as tight as it looked. Ming Qingda clearly did not agree with this suggestion and said with slight mockery, "I don't believe the Juanshan conference can kill someone that even Dongyi can't kill. Other than that, mother, don't forget that the imperial envoy himself is a top ace. He also has the Tiger Guard sent by the emperor at his side. Most importantly, that northern Qi Saint girl Haitang should also be by his side." The old Ming matriarch looked at her son with pity. Killing is putting one's life on the line. It is not a game that cares about success. If someone wants to kill our entire family and you are still considering whether or not you can kill them, then you will never have the chance to kill them. Ming Qingda smiled bitterly and replied, even if we can kill Fan Xian, so what? The emperor is angry and the world is shocked. Can the Ming family survive? Naturally, we have to do it flawlessly and give the people of the world a convincing answer, the old Ming matriarch said coldly. If Fan Xian can be killed, naturally, it will be Dongyi Sigujian who did it. What does it have to do with the Ming family? In any case, Sigujian has taken the blame many times these years. One more doesn't matter. Ming Qingda mockingly said, perhaps this excuse can only fool us, but it cannot fool the people under heaven, much less the Overwatch Council and the Emperor. If Fan Xian can be killed, the old Ming matriarch said expressionlessly, of course, it would be best if peace could be maintained. But if that day truly comes, I believe that the wise emperor of the Qin court will not shake the entire Jiangnan and the foundation of his rule for the sake of a dead illegitimate child. If the matter can be suppressed to the smallest degree, the emperor will certainly suppress it. A living Fan Xian is more valuable than 10 Ming families, but 10 dead Fan Xian cannot compare to a broken Ming family. The emperor does not like the Ming family, but he cannot destroy the Ming family. Thus, the emperor only hopes that this time, Fan Xian will be able to seize the Ming family completely into the hands of the court. If you can understand this, then I can rest assured in handing this family to you. A glimmer of hatred rose to the old Ming matriarch's face. When the time comes, I will throw in my life. Ming Qingda's feelings were mixed. Crying, he said, Mother, what unlucky words are you saying? He laughed coldly in his heart. The old woman was indeed old to be so muddle-headed in seeing things. If she really killed Fan Xian as she said, how could the emperor give the Ming family a way out? Throw in your life? Do you really think your old life is so valuable? To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 362. Shi Chanli walked out of the Bamboo Garden restaurant and made a shushing sound. He wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead. The building behind him was currently being renovated. However, there was still some time before it opened for business. The business of Baoyue brothel expanding into Jiangnan had started off smoothly. However, there had been a small problem with the matter of buying girls in Suzhou. Although they had relied on the third prince's power and influence, they had not been able to invite any of the popular girls. Every time he thought of this matter, Shi Chanli felt a headache. Jiangnan girls were famous for their beauty. Why couldn't they find some decent girls? Had they all been hidden away by someone? Originally there had been other ways. He had also gone to the broker shop to look. However, the girls the brokers enthusiastically recommended were all pitiful girls who had escaped from Jiangbei. Although it was their parents who were selling them, they had not been able to extract their money. Shi Chanli could not bring himself to do it. He was also afraid that Fan Xian would be angry. Speaking of his teacher, Shi Chanli's head swelled even more. He really didn't know what that young master was thinking. After returning from the palace treasury the day before yesterday, he had dove head first into the Hua garden that the salt merchant had given him. He had shut himself inside all day and did not even seem to have made any preparations for the palace treasury's opening bid that was about to arrive. Shi Chanli was wearing a cotton robe. Although he now had the identity of a merchant, he still could not shake off the scholarly mannerisms that his decades of bitter study had nurtured. His hand stroked the smooth walls of the carriage, but he did not get in. The guard beside the carriage looked at him curiously. Countless people passed by beside the carriage. On the busy streets of Suzhou, Shi Chanli's mind suddenly wandered. He looked at the peaceful and happy Jiangnan commoners and furrowed his brows slightly. Thinking back to what had happened this year, he suddenly felt a glimmer of fear toward his own choice. After Yang Wanli's conversation in Hangzhou, although these people still saw Fan Xian as their leader and firmly headed toward that unknown future, Shi Chanli was different from those three schoolmates. However, Shi Chanli was different from those three schoolmates. He had already lost the thought of an official career and began to help Fan Xian take care of some secret matters. He also knew some secret information, so he increasingly felt that Fan Xian was difficult to grasp. They wanted to help the world and provide for the people, but what exactly did their teacher think? He understood that the expansion of Baoyue brothel was, on one hand, to make it convenient for Fan Xian outside of the Overwatch Council to have a second source of information. But, more importantly, it was to make it convenient for Fan Xian to launder money in the future. Perhaps what his teacher had done was for a good purpose, but in the process of reaching this goal, perhaps many sacrifices had to be made. For example, the lives of innocent people, the righteousness that scholars always believed in, and the conscience that everyone seemed to have. At this point, Shi Chanli knew that Fan Xian was already a powerful official and not the righteous official he had hoped for. He also understood that if he wanted to be a righteous official who could leave his name in the annals of history, seizing power was also a necessary part. In this process, the word righteous would appear too stupid. This was a philosophical dilemma. Shi Chanli sank into it, but he could not find an answer. He could only silently get into the carriage and bet on his trust in his teacher. The carriage was headed toward Taiping Money House. Recently, Shi Chanli had been moving silver everywhere there. That 50,000 liang of silver truly terrified him. Sir Fan Jr.'s silver was a bit too much. He could only hope that after he obtained enough power and money, he would still remember what he had thought in the beginning and do something for the world. I know very well what I am doing. Fan Xian looked at Yang Wanli in front of him with a calm expression. After returning to Suzhou from the palace treasury, he had sent Yang Wanli over. Although logically speaking, Yang Wanli could not leave his post without permission and Fan Xian had given random orders, he had the identity of an imperial envoy. Presumably, the officials in Fujian County as well as the people in Shangzhou would not dare to criticize Yang Wanli too much. Yang Wanli sighed and said, "Teacher, I am just worried that the officialdom is dangerous and can tempt one to desire luxury and power." Although he did not finish, the meaning was already clear. Of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Fan Xian liked Yang Wanli the most because he spoke directly and always remembered the hardships of his childhood. He was upright and plain-spoken. He did not care about anything and he was incorruptible and self-restrained. Although Fan Xian was not an upright official, this did not stop him from admiring upright officials. Although Shi Chanli's heart was clear, he was only willing to keep the matter in his heart. As for the other 2, Qing Jialin was overly mediocre and sought stability. Only Hou Jichang, a scholar who had once been as famous as He Zhongwei in Jingdou, had a sharp mind and was truly a good choice to handle matters. It was a pity that he was far away in another province and Fan Xian could not use him for a while. He waved his hand to stop Yang Wanli from worrying too much. He smiled and said, "My nature is firm, why would I need you to worry? Don't always be afraid that I will slide into the abyss of evil. Once I get used to the darkness, I won't be able to see the light." Yang Wanli was slightly startled. He then thought about what kind of person his teacher was. How could he be so useless? Perhaps he had been worrying too much. "Money is only a tool," Fan Xian said. "Anyone who is greedy will always need to use money to exchange for some kind of physical or psychological pleasure. For a person who has enough money, greed for money, if it is not to count silver, then it must be for some other purpose." Yang Wanli shook his head and said, "Greed is difficult to satisfy. There are too many such things in the world." Although Fan Xian often said strange words, Yang Wanli was already used to it. In any case, he understood the general meaning. "I'm not a eunuch," Fan Xian said with a smile. "I don't have any special interest in things like silver." Yang Wanli smiled bitterly and thought, if you don't love silver, then why use Shi Chanli's name to run a brothel? In particular, the operation against the Ming family and the palace treasury this time was clearly to steal silver. When the time came, how much would be handed back to the court? Fan Xian completely ignored his student's silent criticism and said straightforwardly, "I called you over this time because there are some things I need to tell you." Although Yang Wanli disapproved of some of Fan Xian's methods of doing things and felt conflicted in his heart, for the things Fan Xian gave him, as long as they did not violate the law, he would carry them out with great care and effort. "Please give me your orders." He looked at Fan Xian's serious expression and thought it was a matter of government, so he changed the way he addressed him and replied very seriously. Fan Xian glanced at him and said carefully, "There will be an appointment coming from the capital immediately. You will be transferred to the Ministry of Works. I'm letting you know in advance so you won't be confused." Hearing these words, Yang Wanli was startled and truly confused. He was doing well in Fujian County. According to tradition, he would be able to enter the province next year. Not only did his career look good, it was also the right path. Although he was a loyal person, it was not that he did not understand the entanglements in the officialdom. Of course, he knew why his teacher had sent the 3 of them to the provinces after the spring examinations and not find a way to stay in the various ministries in Jingdou. Because the Fan family's power in Jingdou was already strong enough, they needed some help in the provinces. This was the reason Yang Wanli had been sent to Fujian County. Hearing that he was going to be transferred to the Ministry of Works, Yang Wanli was a bit confused. Given his rank, he could still help his teacher do some things outside the capital. After returning to the capital, his official position would be so low that he couldn't even speak. He didn't know what deep meaning his teacher had in this arrangement. Seeing his confusion, Fan Xian explained in a quiet voice, "Entering the Ministry of Works from a local place, according to tradition you will move up half a rank. Don't think this is something I did again. As for why I'm letting you enter the Ministry of Works, you don't need to guess too much." Yang Wanli nodded with confusion. "There are 4 departments in the Ministry of Works." Fan Xian stared into his eyes and said. During the new policies in the first year of the Qing calendar, the Ministry of Water was changed to the Ministry of Clear Water. This time, you will be entering the Ministry of Clear Water. Yang Wanli opened his mouth slightly, thinking that he could guess what his teacher was preparing to do. His tender face flushed red as he said, "Darren, although the repair of the river works costs a lot of silver, this silver cannot be touched." Fan Xian paused and immediately scolded laughingly, "What kind of pig brain do you have? Did the scolding in Hangzhou not wake you up?" Only now did Yang Wanli come to his senses. He thought that even if his teacher wanted to be greedy, he would not care about the Jiangnan Ming family and palace treasury. How could he extend his hand to the river works? He must have thought wrong. He sighed repeatedly with great shame. Fan Xian glared at him in annoyance and sighed. "You need to change your rash personality. It's fine in front of me, but after you enter the Ministry of Works, you will still be like this in front of those incomparably crafty officials. How can I be at ease letting you go?" Yang Wanli gritted his teeth and said, "I will listen to teacher. In the future I will be more steady. Teacher, please explain." Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He slowly raised his head and stared into Yang Wanli's eyes. He stared until Yang Wanli's heart was a little scared. Only then did he calmly say, "The Ministry of Clear Water is responsible for examining and distributing the silver that the court allocates to control the rivers along the river. The amount is very large, particularly after the river burst its banks last year and countless people died. This year, as long as the situation of the court's national treasury improves slightly, the emperor will certainly allocate enough real silver. I want you to go to the Ministry of Clear Water because I want you to look after this silver." Yang Wanli froze in his chair and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. River works? The banks? Flood. A flood of silver? Everyone knew that river transport was the most expensive business in a country's economy and people's lives. Particularly over the past dozen years, the Qing kingdom had repaired the river every year and breached the dikes every year. Silver poured in like a flood, but not a single sound was heard. On one hand, the heavens did not give them face. On the other hand, it was a man-made disaster. From the Ministry of Works in Jingdo to the officials of the river transport governor's manor and below, no one knew how much they had benefited from this enormous amount of silver. The disaster of corruption was greater than a flood. Of course, the emperor also knew of this matter. 4 years ago, the river burst its banks. After the Overwatch Council investigated in detail, the current court killed the river transport governor at that time. It was said that the river transport governor's family had accumulated wealth for the country and had the Empress Dowager as his backer. However, despite the Qing emperor's ruthlessness, he still could not stop the corruption of the river works. The position of the river transport governor had been empty for 4 years. No one had taken it. In addition, in recent years the income of the palace treasury had been declining year by year. Fighting on 2 fronts, the national treasury was empty, and the irrigation facilities on both sides of the river had not been repaired for a long time. This caused the terrifying consequences of the river bursting last year. Something that even the emperor could not completely resolve, for him to do? Yang Wanli had no choice but to be stupid. He knew his own limitations. Perhaps he had the ability to govern a county or a province, but governing a river involved the lives and deaths of tens of thousands of people. He did not dare to say such big words. Thus, he fearfully bowed in front of Fan Xian and repeatedly asked to be excused. Fan Xian looked at him and shook his head. "What are you panicking about? I'm just asking you to look at the silver, not asking you to fill the river with earth. In order to protect the safety of the river, what is there to fear even if Wanli has to fill the river with earth?" Yang Wanli smiled bitterly and replied, "However, since you are thinking about the river works, you know this matter has great implications. If there is the slightest mistake, it will be a tragic matter of drowning tens of thousands of people. I truly do not dare to accept." Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "Don't you want to be an upright official whose name will go down in history? I am asking you to go to the darkest nest of corrupt officials in the Qing court, yet you don't dare to go?" Yang Wanli's face reddened and he slowly lowered his head. Fan Xian didn't say anything more. He only looked at him coldly. After a long time, Yang Wanli finally raised his head bravely. Gritting his teeth he said, "As you wish, sir." He thought to himself that even if he was killed in the river transport yamen, he would at least be able to put in some effort. Just as his teacher had said, since he was working for the benefit of the world, why should he cherish his body? A glimmer of admiration flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. Evenly he said, "To be willing to be cut and dare to pull the governor down from his horse." Yang Wanli paused and thought these words were a bit strange. Fan Xian hid his smile and said, "Furthermore, the position of the river transport governor has always been empty. With the Fan family and the Overwatch Council watching you, although the river transport yamen is as deep as a dragon's pool, if those corrupt officials want to use underhanded methods to deal with you, they will have to see if I agree or not." Yang Wanli thought about it. Right, he had such a powerful backer as his teacher. Why would he be afraid of those people? His mood changed quickly. An eager expression immediately rose to his face. It was as if he was ready to rush back to Jingdo to report and then quickly rush to the banks of the river to see if the court silver was being spent properly. Fan Xian looked at his expression and couldn't resist smiling. Shortly after, he said seriously, "There is one thing you have to remember clearly. Teacher, please instruct me. You can only manage silver, not the river works." Fan Xian looked at him very seriously. Yang Wanli paused slightly. He thought that repairing the river was beneficial to the country and the people, so why couldn't he do it? Fan Xian stared into his eyes and said seriously, "Repairing the river will naturally be done by professional Ministry of Works officials. You just have to make sure the silver is used in the right way. You absolutely cannot manage the river works. In this world, the most terrifying thing is for outsiders to manage insiders. Do you think repairing the river is as simple as filling in the embankments?" Yang Wanli's face revealed an expression that was as it should be. Fan Xian sighed in his heart and warned, "I'm letting you go to the Ministry of Works because of your clear-headedness and sincerity. You can't tolerate sand in your eyes. I'm not relying on your half-baked river management skills." He saw that although Yang Wanli had agreed, he still didn't seem to be listening. In a cold voice, he smiled coldly and said, "Don't think I'm joking." Yang Wanli listened carefully. Yang Wanli unconsciously straightened his body. Fan Xian stared at him and said each word clearly, "If I find out that you dare to criticize the specific matters of repairing the river works and dare to use my reputation to give random ideas, I will immediately send people to chop you into 36 pieces." Yang Wanli was forced by Fan Xian's cold gaze. His body trembled. He knew that his teacher was giving instructions very seriously. He quickly corrected his attitude and agreed sincerely. The two of them then explained the specific details of his appointment, as well as the things he could trust in the river transport governor's yamen. Only now did Fan Xian truly believe that Yang Wanli was not as stupid as his impression of him in the past. Regarding the matters he had given him, he should be able to smoothly resolve them. Thus, he began to talk about the main point of their conversation. "I'm letting you go to the Ministry of Clear Water. I don't actually expect you to be able to get rid of the corruption that has existed for a long time in the river works," Fan Xian said thoughtfully. "The Overwatch Council also has a number of spies there, but there are too many officials. Their connections to the court are too deep. Pulling one hair will affect the whole body. It is not easy to deal with." Although Yang Wanli was surprised, he had finally learned to be smart. He didn't ask questions and instead listened quietly. "Thus, the silver the court pulls out into the river, in the end it will never be enough," Fan Xian said mockingly. "Regardless of whether you believe it or not, in the end, it will become such a situation. Even if the emperor pulls out 2 million liang of silver, the Ministry of Works will still cry that it is not enough. Originally, if we had planned slowly, it was not completely impossible to turn this situation around," Fan Xian said with narrowed eyes. "However, there is not enough time. Last year, the river burst its banks and washed away a number of dams, making the long-neglected dikes and water conservancy facilities on both sides increasingly unbearable. When the water dried up last winter, it was a good time to repair the river. However, at that time, there was not much silver in the national treasury. What do we do this year? If there is no flood this year, then it is the Qing court's good luck," Fan Xian said with narrowed eyes. "If there is another flood, then we won't be able to hold out. Furthermore, we still have to rely on those officials for the river works, so it is not suitable for the Overwatch Council to make any big moves." Only now did Yang Wanli faintly realize that his teacher's body was in Suzhou, but his heart was above the people of the world. His heart warmed slightly. Probingly he said, "There is not enough silver in the national treasury. Furthermore, it is already spring. Even if we can survive the spring floods, we will still need silver later." "This is the true reason I have you go to the Ministry of Works," Fan Xian said calmly. "I will raise a large amount of silver. Most of it will go through the Ministry of Revenue into the National Treasury and then to the River Transport Yamen. However, as I said earlier, there will be harsh deductions along the way, so I don't know how much will be left. Most importantly, I'm afraid there won't be enough time, so I will directly move the other portion of silver to the River Transport Yamen for you to take over." Yang Wanli paled in shock. The large amount of silver Fan Xian spoke of was certainly a terrifying amount. Presumably, it had been taken from the palace treasury. However, this amount of silver, logically speaking, should belong to the palace treasury and then, according to the emperor's edict, move it to the national treasury. For Fan Xian to directly move the silver, at the very least this was using the national treasury for personal gain. At the very most, it was no different from rebellion. "Time is too tight," Fan Xian said helplessly. Fan Xian helplessly said, "In the past, the movement of silver took more than half a year. At that time, damn it, the river would have burst its banks long ago. Bureaucracy kills people." At this time, Yang Wanli knew that Fan Xian's risky and unprofitable method was certainly not for his own benefit. Rather, it was because he wanted the matter of the river repair to quickly step onto the right path. Although he was moved in his heart, he was more worried about his teacher. He anxiously urged, "Sir, you have to be careful in this matter. If someone finds out, what will we do?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "What are you afraid of? Could the emperor bear to kill me?" Yang Wanli thought about it. It was indeed the case. Although it was impossible to explain the source of this silver, as long as it was used on the river works and not used to privately raise death soldiers, how could the emperor make life difficult for his own son? "The source of the silver?" he asked carefully. In reality, he knew that the source of the silver could not see the light of day. However, if he didn't ask clearly, he would always feel uneasy. "Swindling, cheating, stealing, I like to eat rich people," Fan Xian said with a smile. "The palace treasury is about to start the bidding. You don't have to worry about the silver. The important thing is to use this silver well. The 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council will help you handle the specific matters. There will also be people in the Ministry of Works who will help you cover it up. You don't have to worry too much." Yang Wanli understood as soon as he heard this. For such a large sum of money to be poured into the river works through unconventional channels, of course, the upper echelons of the court had to turn a blind eye to it. Perhaps the mastermind was his teacher's father, the Minister of Revenue, who had always seemed somewhat quiet. "My silver will increase," Fan Xian sighed. Fan Xian sighed and said, "There will be more and more every year, so what I am worried about now is not how to earn money, but how to spend it and how to spend it happily." These words were a bit arrogant. However, he had yet to swindle the Ming family's silver into his hands, yet he was already thinking about how to spend it. This matter was inevitably a bit absurd. The position of River Transport Governor has been vacant for 4 years. Fan Xian smiled slightly at his most stubborn student. "I hope that in the near future, you will be the Qin Kingdom's River Transport Governor. Furthermore, you will be the first non-greedy river transport governor in history." Yang Wanli stood proudly. A red sun rose in his chest and lofty sentiments rose. The reason he had to move Suzhou's silver into the river works was to make the most of the time. Before the autumn floods, he had to make the minimum repairs to the riverbanks riddled with holes. Naturally, Yang Wanli did not want to stay any longer. He hurriedly took his leave. He had to return to Fujian County to give his report. He also had to report to the capital and return to the river transport yamen. These tens of thousands of li were indeed tens of thousands of li. Fan Xian sat comfortably in the chair and waited for the person who was about to arrive. He didn't have to wait long before Hai Tang pushed open the door and walked in. She looked at Fan Xian like she was looking at a god. A moment later, she quietly said, "The question is, where did you get so much silver?" "Tomorrow the palace treasury will open the bids," Fan Xian said with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and said, "If Xia Qifei is not an idiot, he will certainly be able to raise the price to a suitable level. 40% of the deposit is not a small sum. Since the Ming family has so honestly handed over the silver to the transport company with both hands, I have to spend it to be worthy of the Ming family." Hai Tang shook her head and said, "The imperial censor has already come from the capital. The Jiangnan governor's manor will also send people to listen. You won't be able to move much of this silver." She continued, "Even if Xia Qifei is able to take over the Cui family's route, it will still take at least 7 months for the goods to turn into cash. Fan Xian smiled and gazed at the girl. In any case, it is to transport goods to the north. In any case, your emperor is going to pay up. Furthermore, my transport company Yamen has enough silver stored away. After the matter is settled, I will transfer some silver from Taiping Money House to use first. Presumably you won't have too many objections. Haitang immediately smiled bitterly and said, that is not bad. It is only 7 months. You can always pay it back. However, the emperor does not know of your arrangements. Furthermore, using the silver that the Qi internal court has worked so hard to save for so many years to build a river for the Qing kingdom, no matter how you look at it, this cannot be justified, right? This matter could not be justified. If the clever little emperor of northern Qi knew of Fan Xian's way of playing, he would probably be so angry he would vomit blood. Fan Xian spread out his hands and gazed at Haitang with a compassionate expression. Duo, you once said that the people of the world are all favored by heaven. We have to treat them as people. If the river bursts its banks and drowns the Qing people, are they not people? Do you have the heart to watch this happen? The silver of the northern Qi internal court, the silver of the Ming family, the silver of the court, are they not all the silver of the people of the world? I am only taking a great risk to use it on the people of the world. What is wrong with that? Haitang smiled slightly and nodded. Of course, it is not bad to use the silver of the people of the world on the people of the world. However, if in the future there is a time of famine in the Qi territory, I hope that Sir Fan will not be stingy with your assistance. Fan Xian didn't even think about it. With a smile on his face he said, of course. It seemed that Haitang had not expected him to answer so quickly. She couldn't help but freeze to the spot. She didn't know if he truly thought this or if he was just casually making a joke. After all, there were too few people in this world who truly did not have the concept of a country. Haitang shook her head and said, let's not talk about the matter of silver for now. However, you truly surprised me today. I have seen many officials and powerful officials who are greedy for silver, but I truly did not think that you would use your greedy silver on such a matter. Fan Xian slowly raised his head and said with a not quite there smile, is it hard to understand? In reality, it is very easy to understand. Just as I said to Wanli earlier, silver is only a tool. It is only a method used to obtain physical and psychological pleasure. Earning silver is difficult and spending silver is even more difficult. How can one spend it comfortably? Some people like to buy horses, some like to buy beautiful women, some like to buy manors to become landowners, and some like to buy official positions. And for me these are all too simple matters, Fan Xian continued. Since I am going to spend silver to buy pleasure, then I have to spend the largest amount of silver to buy the greatest pleasure in the world. Pleasure alone, pleasure for all, which is pleasure. Fan Xian began to use old Master Meng to educate Haitang. Haitang smiled slightly and sat down. So, when all is said and done, you just want to make yourself happier. Just like you mentioned in your letters before, you hope that this world can be more beautiful. If you live in it, you will also be more at ease. Correct? Fan Xian said with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and said, even if you live in luxury and gather power in one body, once the country falls and people die, how can you enjoy it? Even if you sing loudly, have beauty to accompany you, and travel the world without a trace of cloud, your body is surrounded by hungry corpses and black crows pecking at you. How can you be happy? Raising a dog to bite people and laughing loudly, this is a very low-quality life of a hedonistic young master. I cannot be happy. In the end he came to a conclusion. One person is good but tens of thousands are not. This is not good, only when everyone is good is it truly good. Haitang stared into his eyes and suddenly shook her head helplessly. I really don't know which of your words are true and which are false. Just what kind of person are you? Fan Xian thought for a bit and then said sincerely, why has no one ever believed me? Actually, I'm a good person. Haitang lowered her head and hid her lake-like clear eyes. In a quiet voice she said, good person, tomorrow the palace treasury opens the bidding. Do you plan to continue being a good person? Fan Xian's expression calmed. Sometimes not only am I not a good person, I am also an evil person, a butcher. However, these two do not conflict. Haitang did not continue this topic. She seemed to ask very casually, these 2 mornings, you have begun to resume your cultivation again. Is the condition of your Jinqi better? In reality, starting from the lakeside in the west of Hangzhou, Fan Xian's daily routine meditation at dawn and dusk had begun to recover. However, for some reason he unconsciously avoided Haitang. It was as if there were some things he was hiding from her. Now that Haitang had asked this to his face, Fan Xian did not respond. He only smiled and shook his head. Haitang smiled faintly and asked again, "The idea of spending money you spoke of earlier is indeed new. However, there are many injustices in the world and there are many poor and needy people. Why did you choose the river works first? Charitable halls will gradually open in various places. The court will think of a way to settle the refugees in the Jiangbei area. The emperor and I have discussed this before," Fan Xian said calmly. "I must hold at least a portion of the palace treasury silver in my own hands and then use it to do some appropriate things." "Is this the last wish of some elder?" Haitang asked curiously. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. "You still haven't answered me. Why did you choose the river works first?" Fan Xian still did not answer. A picture appeared out of thin air in his mind. In the picture, a beautiful yellow-robed woman was standing on a rock by the river. Her face was full of worry as she looked at the ferocious flood dragon in the river and the laborious commoners on the other side of the river bank. "Rest first," he said quietly. "Tomorrow the palace treasury opens. There is still a battle to fight. Please everyone vote for me. The situation is tense and the mood is exciting. It is as if I have returned to the month of the new book." Scratch my head. The month of the new book is actually being nagged at by the situation of the battle is not as tense as it is now. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 363. It was said to be an auspicious day on the 22nd day of the third month in the 6th year of the Qing calendar. Thus, after the imperial envoy arrived in Jiangnan, the palace treasury's first New Year opening bid was chosen for this day. The spring sunshine was bright and beautiful, and the gentle breeze brought warmth. The young masters and ladies in Suzhou all headed out for a walk. The grass on the wide road had not yet grown, and the birds had not yet flown, but they were already startled. Outside the city, there were green mountains everywhere and threads of green water, making it a good place for men and women to hook up. The air was filled with a fresh and beautiful smell. Suzhou was another scene. South of the Jiangnan governor's manor was the Palace Treasury Transport Company's permanent Suzhou Yamen. Regardless of whether it was the yamen of the various departments of Jiangnan Road or the yamen of the Suzhou government, they were all opened in this area. It was a place where the atmosphere of officials gathered. Usually, it was heavily guarded and the most important place to guard. Today, one could only see soldiers patrolling the two sides of the street, each holding a long spear in their hand. There were also bailiffs who forced themselves to be alert and vigilantly watched the movements of all sides in the thick spring sleepiness. This large area had already been tightly controlled. Every year on the opening day of the palace treasury, it was always like this. First, it was because the large merchants from all over brought too much silver. Second, it was because other than the officials of the transport company, there were also eunuchs sent by the palace to supervise the opening of the palace treasury. The governor of Jiangnan Road would also be present to listen. At this time, the group of imperial censorate censors who had nothing to do all day could not be missing. There was too much silver gathered here today and too many high-ranking officials, so the issue of safety became the most important. Fortunately, Suzhou was deep by the banks of the Yangtze River. The Qing kingdom's military was powerful, so no power dared to make any probing moves. Even the thieves in Suzhou had long been chased out of the city. It was a good time to collect money during the Qingming festival. As usual, the transport company had vacated a large courtyard. This courtyard was incomparably wide. Along the two sides of the main hall were a row of small rooms. It was said to have been the examination venue for students in the Jiangnan area in the previous dynasty. Later, when the Qing emperor inspected the palace treasury in the south, he found that this kind of layout was suitable for holding bids. Thus he set it here and formed the usual practice. Usually this courtyard was empty in the highest area of Suzhou. It was loaned by the transport company to the governor's manor yamen to manage accounts. However, it was returned to the transport company yamen in March. It had been renovated and cleaned since more than 10 days ago. Now the house was extremely bright and clean. There were soldiers standing guard outside the house, and a few plain-looking guards stood by the side of the hall in the courtyard. The light in the hall was a little dim, and one could only vaguely see a row of 4 armchairs placed behind a table. When the Suzhou branch of the capital Xingfeng restaurant on South Street ran out of jietang buns, the door to this house finally opened. The merchants from various states did not panic. They ascended the stairs in an orderly manner, turning a blind eye to the vigilant gazes of the soldiers around them. After more than 10 years, they had long understood this whole set of procedures. Behind a merchant was often a family, as well as the political factions behind the family. The opening of the palace treasury was a matter of great importance, so the representatives who came today were all prominent figures in their families. However, there were not many of them. These merchants all brought their own attendants and accountants behind them. They also carried boxes, account books, and other related tools. Walking in front of everyone was, of course, the representative of the Ming family. Since last year, the Ming family had already handed most of their power to young Master Ming Launcher's hands. The old Ming master rarely showed his face in public. What shocked many of the merchants was that the old Ming master, Ming Qingda, had personally come to the large courtyard. Ming Qingda narrowed his tired eyes and raised his hands in greeting to his colleagues. He stroked the long beard on his chin and walked proudly through the door. The Jiangnan merchants faintly saw the Ming family as their leader. They quickly returned the greeting and followed behind him through the door. No one felt a glimmer of unease. Since it was the palace treasury bidding, of course the Ming family would go first. Everyone did not understand why the Ming family would be so cautious today and even invite the old master. Occasionally, someone would think of the new head of the transport company in the palace treasury, the imperial envoy. They would also think of the young master of the Ming family communicating endlessly in secret this month. Only then did they faintly guess that today's palace treasury bidding would probably not be as smooth as in previous years, nor would it be as bright and joyous as today's spring scenery. The 2 rows of rooms under the eaves had long been pasted with names. The families entered one by one. The Ming family was in the first large room on the left. They had brought the most people, a full 16 shopkeepers and waiters. Once they entered the room, there were servants arranged by the transport company to pour them tea, hand over warm towels, and some exquisite pastries. Although it was the government that had opened the bidding, they knew that these rich people had to be well received. Using the words Fan Xian had said with a smile after learning of the previous arrangements, if they were going to kill a pig, they had to fatten it up first. Ming Qingda sat steadily in his chair. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at the light scattering through the courtyard outside. Before entering the courtyard, he had made eye contact with the merchants and knew that everyone's thoughts were the same. In the face of profit, no one was willing to raise the price, particularly those merchants. They did not dare to offend him. Thinking of this, Ming Qingda's heart relaxed slightly. He asked in a low voice, "How much longer?" Ming Launcher stood obediently by his father's side. He lowered his body and said, "Soon." He stretched out a pair of white hands and brought the tea in front of his father. His hands were so clean it was as if they had never been stained with blood. Ming Qingda nodded. Since the court was still inventing bids and no one in the world had the wealth to fight with him, there shouldn't be much difference from previous years. For some reason his lips were still a bit dry. Perhaps it was because he was gradually getting older, and his energy was always lacking. Thinking of this, a strange emotion welled up in the master of the Ming family's heart. His mother was already so old, why was her body still so healthy? Ming Qingda unconsciously swept his gaze across and easily identified the families these rooms represented. Although he had rarely personally entered the market these years, his friendship with the older generation was still there. The families that had come today were all descendants of the second generation. Presumably, they knew that of the 16 palace treasury bids, the Chui family could fight for the ones the Ming family had vacated. As for the 8 that the Ming family had set in stone, they could not move. However, the door to the last room under the eaves was still closed. No one knew which family had sent in their bid, but the person had not arrived yet. Ming Qingda took a sip of tea and moistened his throat. He furrowed his brows and said, "Whose family is B6? It's about to start, why hasn't the person arrived yet?" Ming Launcher was startled and was unable to reply. He had clearly investigated in detail, so why was that room still empty? Some kind of warning sign began to grow in Ming Qingda's heart. After Fan Xian returned the 400,000 liang banknotes, he sank into silence. He didn't know what exactly the imperial envoy was thinking. He glanced at his son and said with slight anger, "When doing things, you have to be watertight. You haven't even checked the person clearly. What if something goes wrong later?" Ming Launcher's expression was slightly embarrassed. He could only admit his mistake, but he was not satisfied in his heart. These figures of wealthy families all had this bad habit of not saying what they thought. He probingly said, "Could it be a salt merchant? They have always done things strangely. Perhaps they are also envious this time." Ming Qingda's expression was dark. He shook his head and said, "It's not a salt merchant. First, they gave us a promise. Second, Sir Shui also once gave me a promise." This master of the Ming family looked at the empty room across from him. He looked at the tightly shut door and the faint coldness seeping through the glass window. A powerful unease welled up in his heart. It is truly a pity this time. In the study of the Jiangnan governor's manor, an advisor sighed. The Cui family has left 6 empty, yet it is not convenient for us to interfere. We can only watch as so much silver is divided up by the Ming family and those local rich landlords. It is truly a pity. The governor of Jiangnan Road, first-level official Sir Xueqing, wore a slight smile on his face and did not say anything. The advisor sitting beside him also showed a look of pity and said, Yang Jimei came a few times a few days ago. He was still hoping that you could help him put in a good word for him in front of Sir Fan Jr. His family has been in the salt business for generations. Now, looking at the fat meat of the palace treasury, he is also hungry. Yang Jimei was the largest salt merchant in the 2 Huai rivers, or rather a salt smuggler. He had always carefully curried favor with the governor's manor. Xueqing thought for a bit and then smiled. Hungry? Who isn't hungry? Yang Jimei, that old killing talent. I asked him for such a good Hua garden, but he stubbornly refused to give it to me. This time he insists on going through my hands to give it to Fan Xian as a residence. Do you think I don't know what he is thinking? Does Sir Fan not know? As the Jiangnan governor, he controlled 1/7 of the world's military and civil affairs. His power was strong and powerful, and he had many eyes and ears. Thinking of something, he couldn't help but sigh. Sir Fan will certainly have to give Yang Jimei some face in the future, but the matter of the palace treasury, he won't have much of a chance. The advisor asked curiously, what exactly is the imperial envoy thinking? Who exactly is he planning to give the 6 empty spots to? The smile on Xueqing's face gradually faded. Actually, there is no need to ask. Since the emperor sent him to Jiangnan, these 6 spots will naturally be prepared by him. He then smiled coldly and said, never mind these 6 spots, I think it will be very difficult for the Ming family to keep their own 8 spots. The advisor furrowed his brows deeply and said, I just don't know which family Sir Fan Jr. has chosen this time. Xueqing smiled mockingly. He ruled over Jiangnan, so he knew what Fan Xian had done. He smiled and said, I'm afraid none of you would have thought of that choice. This imperial envoy is indeed very powerful. He did not choose a spokesperson from among the merchants and instead poached someone from the wilderness. If that guy had swaggered into Suching on a normal day, I would probably have thrown him into prison and demanded some benefits. The advisor did not know the inside story and laughed dryly. He was still a bit reluctant in his heart and probingly asked, concerning the matter of opening the palace treasury, did the imperial envoy not say anything to you? According to the customs of officialdom, a fat piece of meat like the palace treasury could not be swallowed up by a single faction of officials, particularly since Xueqing's position was high and deeply rooted in Jiangnan. No matter how arrogant Fan Xian was, he still had to show some goodwill to the governor's manor. Xueqing furrowed his brows slightly and shook his head. Naturally, Sir Fan Jr. has mentioned this matter. Although he is young, he does things very smoothly. Minister Fan and Director Chen have taught him well. However, I had no choice this time and could only politely decline Sir Fan Jr.'s good intentions. Ah! The advisor cried out in surprise. Politely decline good intentions? As long as Fan Xian opened his mouth, this small good intentions would probably be worth at least a few 100,000 liang of silver. When did the governor become so incorruptible and self-restrained? Had he learned to change his face? Xueqing smiled self-mockingly and stood up. Although it is close, we should still leave first. Sir Fan Jr. is waiting in the courtyard, as is Guizheng, that white-faced old man. The eunuchs from the palace are also coming with an edict. We can't be too slow. He did not explain to the advisors who were even closer to him than his wife why he had politely declined Fan Xian's good intentions. Xueqing knew that although the palace treasury appeared to be a contest between Fan Xian and the eldest princess, there was actually a deeper meaning behind it. Just how should the princes be ranked? This was already beginning to become a thorny problem. Xueqing's identity did not allow him to pick a side too early. Otherwise the emperor would be very angry. Thus, it was not convenient for him to partake in this feast of the palace treasury. Under the protection of the guards, he walked out of the front door of the Jiangnan governor's manor. Xueqing unconsciously turned his head and looked at the signboard in front of the manor. His eyes were dazzled by the newly risen sun. A powerful sense of unease welled up in his heart. The emperor's actions these years had become increasingly strange. Everyone under heaven was looking at Jingdo and guessing at the future situation. For the Qing court, this kind of turmoil was definitely not a good thing. If people's hearts were uncertain, what would the officials do? Your Majesty, what exactly are you thinking? The palace treasury opened. The merchants who had come to bid were already sitting in their rooms waiting. Fan Xian, who was in charge of this matter, was still leisurely drinking tea. The person drinking tea and conversing with him was a eunuch from Jingdo. The palace treasury was the property of the royal family. According to the rules, it had to be jointly supervised by Taichung Temple and the internal court. Since Fan Xian himself was a junior official of Taichung Temple did not send anyone else to Suzhou for unnecessary matters. It also saved him a lot of trouble. However, a senior eunuch had come. At the same time, it was a big problem. Eunuch Huang speaks reasonably. Fan Xian placed the teacup on the table and smiled slightly. I also think that it is better to stay put than to move. Everything should be done according to the old rules. This senior eunuch from the palace had a very high rank. Otherwise, he would not have been entrusted with such a heavy responsibility. He had a fat head and big ears, and the fat on both sides of his cheeks were piled together. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he smiled insincerely and said, "With you in charge of this matter, I am at ease." This eunuch had always been deep in the inner palace. Although he knew of Fan Xian's great name, he thought that he had the emperor's orders and was not afraid of him. On the contrary, he had been in Suzhou for a few days, but Fan Xian had not invited him to his manor for a chat. This fact of being ignored made Eunuch Huang feel uncomfortable in his heart. In the conversation earlier, Eunuch Huang had brought Fan Xian a piece of very bad news. More accurately, he had passed on the Empress Dowager's verbal order for Fan Xian to manage the matter of the palace treasury. He had to follow the old rules and not mess around. Do not mess around? The old rules? Fan Xian smiled coldly in his heart. Naturally, this meant that what should belong to the Ming family should belong to the Ming family. The rest could be slowly dealt with by himself. It looked like after the eldest princess returned to the capital, the Empress Dowager's heart ached for this young daughter. She had pulled a long face and used so much face. He knew that the Empress Dowager was warning him not to go overboard in his actions. He had to leave some living money for the members of the royal family to spend. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but want to laugh. He thought to himself that his emperor was known as the emperor of a generation. How come he was living more and more these years? How could he allow his mother and sister to send the family business to his son's manor? Of course, he knew that the emperor was not a simple person. However, he was becoming more and more confused as to why the emperor had created such a chaotic situation. If you want great governance, you must first create great chaos? He unconsciously furrowed his brows and said. What? Eunuch Huang asked curiously. Nothing, Fan Xian smiled and said. I have troubled you to pass on the edict. Eunuch Huang coughed and said with slight arrogance, It is because the Empress Dowager trusts a servant like me. Of course, I also have to thank Sir Fan Jr. for giving me this face. Fan Xian didn't reply. He only smiled and looked at Eunuch Huang's pig-like face. A moment later he said, Your face? Eunuch Huang was startled. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, Eunuch Huang in front of me, it is best if you put away that act. Old Yao, Old Dai and Old Ho know how to conduct themselves better than you. Eunuch Huang was furious but then immediately shocked. The three people Fan Xian mentioned were all powerful eunuchs in the palace. Although Old Dai had long lost power, other than the head eunuch Hongzhu who had recently been transferred to the Eastern Palace, Old Yao and Old Ho all had more face than him. Fan Xian saying this meant that even Eunuch Yao and Eunuch Ho had to be respectful in front of him. What did he think he was? Eunuch Huang was shrewd and restrained his anger. On the contrary, he smiled and replied, Sir is right. In his heart he looked down on Fan Xian. Such a young and powerful official who made enemies everywhere would probably not last long in the future. Furthermore, he was, after all, close to the Empress Dowager. His identity was a bit special. Fan Xian gave a not quite there smile and said, Eunuch Huang in Suzhou, it is best if you behave yourself. Eunuch Huang lowered his face and replied, Imperial Envoy, what are you saying? You speak in Jingdo, Fan Xian said darkly. What I hate the most is when someone uses the Empress Dowager to pressure me. Other people are somewhat afraid of you, but that does not include me. After you return to the capital, you can go around talking about it and see what kind of situation it will be. Eunuch Huang raised his head in anger. How dare an official be so disrespectful to the Empress Dowager? Did Fan Xian really not want his life anymore? Fan Xian had his reasons for saying this. With a cold expression, he swept out his sleeves and turned down a side corridor toward the main hall of the manor. Throwing down one last sentence, he said, Understand your own identity. Your surname is not Hong. Other than eunuch Hong, what else was there in that chilly royal palace that Fan Xian feared? Fan Xian stood coldly on the stone steps in front of the main hall. The merchants in the rooms under the eaves on both sides quickly came out and bowed to him. His gaze stared straight at the main door. He didn't even glance at the Ming father and son in the Primus room closest to him. The large door was pushed open with a creak. A line of silent people slowly walked in. This group of people did not carry the usual aura of wealth and nobility of merchants, nor did they have the smell of officials. Instead, they were filled with a sense of bloodthirsty wilderness. When this group of people stood in the middle of the courtyard, it was like a few vicious wolves had suddenly appeared among a flock of sheep. There was a deer's tail on top of a cake. It appeared out of place and extremely abrupt. The person in the lead was the commander of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei. Xia Qifei was wearing a light green washed silk, but it still could not hide the iron-blooded aura on his body. Although his expression was calm, his slightly narrowed eyes still revealed a glimmer of excitement and nervousness. Xia Qifei raised his hands in a salute toward Fan Xian and said, "Sir Envoy, I have come late." "Not late," Fan Xian said coldly. "As long as you came, it's fine." The big merchants in Jiangnan often had shady businesses. Furthermore, they also relied on the power of the local wilderness in many places. As the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei actually had some secret dealings with these merchants and even the Ming family. Therefore, there were some people who had seen Xia Qifei's true appearance. Today, when he led his subordinates to stand in the courtyard, there were people with sharp eyes who immediately recognized him. The whispers gradually rose and gradually turned into countless exclamations of surprise. Even water bandits had come to the palace treasury to bid. The large merchants looked at Xia Qifei in the courtyard with faces full of terror. They couldn't resist glancing at Fan Xian standing on the stone steps. No matter how they thought about it, they could not understand this matter. Water bandits doing business? Then what would they, the merchants, do? Were they going to be mountain bandits? This world, ever since Sir Fan Jr.'s name had appeared, it seemed to have become strange and motley and difficult to grasp. What these Jiangnan merchants were more curious about was, even if Xia Qifei went around robbing, how could he gather so much silver? However, since these Jiangnan water bandits had already entered the door of the palace treasury, presumably they had at least paid the security deposit. If water bandits could make so much money, then why did they still need to work so hard to do business? Standing in the doorway of the room closest to the stone steps, Ming Qingda narrowed his eyes and looked at the last person to enter the courtyard. In a quiet voice he said, "Who is this person?" "It should be Xia Qifei," Ming Lansher said next to his father's ear. "The leader of the Jiangnan water bandits. I've had some contact with him in the past, but I've never seen him in person. I don't know what's going on, but he's also here today to join in the fun." Ming Qingda's eyes narrowed even more. It was almost impossible to see the deep coldness in them. They only heard him faintly say, "Looks like this person is a chess piece the imperial envoy planted in advance." At this moment, Xia Qifei slowly turned his head and met the gaze of the master of the Ming family. He smiled slightly. His smile was very sincere, revealing boundless enmity and bloodthirsty desire. With Fan Xian's help, the seventh young master of the Ming family, who had his mother killed and his property stolen, finally had the opportunity to stand upright on the stage for revenge. The chapter is called The Door of the Palace Treasury. This is the name I thought of when I wrote the first chapter of the Year of Qingyu. I've finally written this chapter. Feels very good, ha. To be continued. If you want to know what happens after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 364. They didn't have to wait too long before the Jiangnan governor, Xueqin, also hurried over. Imperial censor Guozheng, who had been dawdling in the back courtyard, finally walked to the front hall. At this time, the officials from all four sides who were in charge of and supervising the opening of the palace treasury finally gathered together. Guozheng was no longer the imperial censor of the left, who was the prestigious imperial censor of the imperial censorate, but he still had a certain amount of power in inspecting the various roads. His and Fan Xian's old grievances had not been resolved, so it was difficult to avoid awkwardness when they met. As the four officials bowed to each other, they always felt that Fan Xian's calm and cold gaze hid a glimmer of danger. Of the four officials, eunuch Huang, who had come from the capital, represented the palace. The Jiangnan governor, Xueqin, represented the court official system. The imperial censor, Guozheng, represented the imperial censor system. As for Fan Xian, he represented many powers such as the Palace Treasury Transport Company, the Overwatch Council, and even Taichang Temple, the organization that managed the royal family. Of course, everyone represented the court and the emperor. Fan Xian sat in the second chair and smiled slightly as he spoke to Xueqing. He saw the situation clearly. There were too many people watching this matter. Regardless of who it was, regardless of which power, it would be difficult for them to complete the transactions under the table. The palace treasury bidding process formed in history effectively ensured fairness. At least it was fair on the surface. As long as the merchants had money, they could fight for the right to sell the 16 items of the palace treasury. He thought this way and the other three also thought this way. Eunuch Huang and Guozheng met each other's eyes. Although there was a hidden uneasiness in their opinion, Fan Xian could not play any tricks in front of everyone. What they had to ensure was that the Ming family would still be able to obtain the same share as in previous years. Eunuch Huang and the imperial censor were originally two classes that were as incompatible as fire and water in history. Today they stood in the same camp with great tacit understanding. However, these two did not understand many secrets and did not pay enough attention to the last person to enter the palace treasury door, Master Xia Chifei. Xueqing was different. The Jiangnan governor had the attitude of watching a show. With a face full of peace, he watched the giant merchants and the people around him below the stage. Watching a show was not afraid of the height of the stage. It was always easier than acting. A number of people sang on one side of the stage. The thick doors of the palace treasury courtyard slowly closed again. The soldiers and Overwatch Council officials outside pulled up tight defenses. In the past, the palace treasury bidding usually ended in a day. However, the rules of the court allowed each merchant to use 2 days to bid. There was a loud bang. Fan Xian smiled and covered his ears, looking at the spring thunder rising into the sky outside the courtyard. The spring thunder soared into the sky, exploding under the light clouds. The sound was clear and crisp, spreading far and wide to the ground, causing countless people's hearts to tremble. In the city of Suzhou, the brothel girls who had worked hard last night were roused by this thunderclap. They cursed a few obscenities, then crawled back into their quilts and slept soundly. The child who was begging his parents for money to buy candies on the street thought that God was punishing him for being naughty. He was so scared that he started crying. In the backyard, the black dog that was peeing on an old tree root was startled by the thunder. It lowered its front limbs and buried its head in its furry bag, mimicking an ostrich. Humans' reactions were always different. When this spring thunder fell into the ears of some people, it had a different meaning. Regardless of whether it was the various advisors and shopkeepers gathered on the north pier of Suzhou or the Suzhou residents discussing the matter of the bidding in the tea houses, everyone raised their heads and looked in the direction of the south of the city. Looking at the invisible courtyard, they knew that the palace treasury bidding had already begun. The palace treasury bidding in the spring of the 6th year of the Qing calendar had actually not gone smoothly from the beginning. First, the Palace Treasury Transport Company summarized the profits and losses of each merchant last year. Naturally, there was no lack of words of encouragement. The deputy of the transport company, Ma Jie, who was responsible for giving the speech, sternly reported the situation of the court's investigation of the Cui family. This was a warning to the merchants below not to think that the court was not watching them. These were the rules of the past, so no one cared. However, when Ma Jie talked about the specifics of today's bidding, the mansion was in an uproar. The merchants all stood up to express their opposition. Even the 4 high officials sitting in the main hall began to argue. The transport company had suddenly decided to divide the original 16 items into 34 smaller items and would not carry out bundled bidding this year. This change did not appear to be big, but for the merchants below, it was something they could not accept. The reason was very simple. 3 months before the bidding, these Jiangnan merchants had already privately colluded with each other, drawing up the boundaries between each other. Well water does not interfere with river water so as to avoid hurting each other's harmony, and even more so by raising the price and hurting their wealth. For example, what the Lingnan Xiong family had to fight for this year was the northern bid for the wine category, while the Chuanzhou Sun family wanted the overseas marketing rights for their porcelain goods. If they followed the transport company's intentions and divided the 16 major items into 34 smaller items, although on the surface, everyone could still maintain their bottom line, the 8 major items that were expected to go to the Ming family would be divided into 2 bundled bids. After they were all broken down, who knew whether or not some merchant would suddenly become envious and want to steal some of the Ming family's share? After all, after they were no longer bundled, it seemed that the most profitable sources of income did not need that much silver. Once someone was tempted by the Ming family's share, what would happen to the Ming family? They would certainly go back and steal someone else's share. This was determined by the profit-seeking nature of merchants. They were only afraid that when the palace treasury opened its doors today, it would be a mess. These Jiangnan merchants, what they were most afraid of was chaos. The Ming family had already agreed that they would not interfere with the Cui family's share. These merchants could already eat a few more bowls of fat meat today. Of course, they didn't want anyone to mess up their plans. In their eyes, the reason why the imperial envoy would make such a change was actually very simple. First, he wanted everyone's eyes to turn red from killing in the chaos and raise the price. Second, he wanted to break down the income and dilute the amount of silver needed for each item. He wanted Xia Qifei, who entered the courtyard last, to also get a share of the pie. These crafty merchants had already realized that the long silent room before was the imperial envoy's chosen representative. However, we can all understand that the imperial envoy wants to earn money, but you can't use such a seemingly fair but actually evil method. Sir Fan, this proposal is not appropriate. After Eunuch Huang's face had been shaved by Fan Xian, he still appeared sufficiently calm. He squeezed out a smiling expression on his fat face and said, "According to the rules of the past, 16 items are 16 items. Why do we suddenly have to divide them? This matter has to be decided by the capital." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said a few words. He then turned his head and said to Xueqing in a low voice, "Governor, dividing them into smaller items and no longer binding them is actually just to allow more people to have the right to enter. This matter is always beneficial to the court." Xueqing was silent for a moment and revealed a difficult expression. "Although it is so, this matter is no small matter. I think Sir Fan should report it to the court, and after it has been discussed in the palace, we can slowly push it forward next year." Seeing that Xueqing had also expressed his opposition, Fan Xian felt a bit unhappy. Looking at the rowdy merchants below, a glimmer of pity flashed through his mind. The reason he had to divide the items today was not at all what these merchants thought was the reason. Indeed, he wanted to test whether or not it was possible to dig out the 2 most profitable items from the Ming family's 8 large items and give them to Xia Qifei. But the truly important reason was actually thinking for these merchants. These merchants all thought that the 6 items left behind by the Cui family were already in their pockets, so they would not fight with the Ming family for them. However, in a moment, Xia Qifei was certain to swallow all 6 of the Cui family's items into his stomach. These merchants could only eat those 2 pitiful items. Earlier, there had been reports that the Lingnan Xiong family and Xuanzhou Sun family had both prepared a large sum of silver and were sharpening their knives in preparation to accept the Cui family's route. In a moment, once all their efforts were in vain, these merchants would suffer a great loss. Because of the Cui family's collapse, the number of merchants who came to the palace treasury to bid today was 3 times more than in previous years. Fan Xian's original intention was for these merchants to have something to eat, which was why he had suggested dividing the items. Unexpectedly, no one appreciated it. Although he understood that these merchants did not know how the situation would develop in a moment, which was why they raised their opposition so forcefully, Fan Xian still found it difficult to suppress the sullen feeling in his heart. He argued a little more with Eunuch Huang and Guizheng beside him. After explaining for a while, he found that the merchants still insisted on doing things according to the usual practice of previous years. The other 3 officials were also dead set on the word rules, and did not dare to loosen their tongues. Fan Xian finally decided to give up. As the saying goes, retreat in order to advance. Sometimes this was the logic. Deputy Ma Jie turned his head and glanced at Fan Xian with difficulty. Fan Xian waved his hand, indicating that the discussion was over. The merchants were overjoyed and all bowed deeply, saying that the imperial envoy was wise. Fan Xian looked at these merchants with cold eyes and couldn't resist shaking his head. He thought to himself, just don't cry in a moment. Xueqing sat beside him and smiled slightly as he stroked his beard without saying anything. In reality, his gaze was focused on the room closest to the main hall and the room furthest away. At first, there was a lot of noise in the front, but the calmest were those 2 rooms. He knew Xia Qifei was Fan Xian's person. However, he didn't know where Fan Xian had prepared the silver or how the Ming family was planning to respond. The bidding had not been going on for long. There were already merchants who began to regret it. The head of the Xiong family in Lingnan became the first pitiful fellow to almost cry. The Palace Treasury Transport Company officials stood on the high steps and gave a salute. Then each room began to bid. Naturally, the bids could not be shouted out like bidding for girls in a brothel. 50 liang. 100 liang. When the court did things, there had to be some rules. For example, the merchants of North Cotton Yarn Road would, after the officials gave the salute, calculate last year's profit and this year's trend. They would have their own old shopkeepers make detailed calculations and then write down an accurate number on a piece of paper. They would seal it in a craft paper bag and have the transport company officials below deliver it to the flower hall on the left of the main hall. The merchants had 3 chances to bid, and they all opened open bids. If someone bid higher than them the first time, these merchants still had a chance to raise the price. In the end, the third bid would be the final one. It was a very simple rule for bidding: the highest bidder wins. Then, the merchants who won the bid had to, in the first instant, either joyfully or painfully, take out up to 40% of the deposit and deliver it to the flower hall. In the flower hall were the accountants of the transport company, as well as old accounting officials sent over by the Jingdo Ministry of Revenue. They were responsible for comparing the numbers each merchant brought up and inspecting the banknotes the merchants finally handed over. It had been many years since a merchant had stupidly brought a dozen boxes of silver to the bidding. From this point of view, the palace treasury bidding was not much different from bidding for a prostitute in a brothel. It was just that the girl in the palace treasury was a bit more expensive. Regardless of whether it was the merchants or the busy officials, they were no strangers to this scene. At this moment in the courtyard, the officials were busily walking around, holding the envelopes each family had handed over. The officials of the Overwatch Council were vigilantly watching everything to prevent cheating that was already difficult to happen. At this time, the bid was for the wine category from the north. This was already the third bid. The person who came from the Lingnan Xiong family today was the current head of the family, Xiong Bailing. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Looking at the previous 2 bids, the muscles on his face twitched. He wanted to cry but had no tears. The Lingnan Xiong family had always done business in the south of the Qin kingdom. Because of geographical and opportunity problems, they had never had the opportunity to extend their reach to the north, so it was difficult to open up business. This year, because of the fall of the Chui family, these merchants had the opportunity to seize the northern marketing rights, so Xiong Bailing was determined to win this bid. He was also the one who had opposed Fan Xian's division of the project the most. However, at this time he began to regret it. He had clearly already had the clan prepare enough silver, but the previous 2 bids had been forcefully suppressed by someone else. Xiong Bailing's eyes were red. Anxiety attacked his heart. If he didn't win this bid, it wasn't just a matter of how much money he would earn this year. Rather, his family's march to the north around the Ming family would be forced to slow down. Thus, he hated the person who didn't follow the rules and dared to compete with him for the bid. Other than the hatred, there was also endless fear. He knew that person had the imperial envoy as a backer, but the problem was, where did he get so much money? B4. He looked hatefully at the quiet room in the back. Xia Qifei and his group in room B4 had been very quiet the entire time, but when it came to bidding, they were very vicious and merciless. Most importantly, they didn't know what kind of expert was helping them. They had calculated a year's profit in the north of the wine business so clearly, and they also had a clear estimate of his family's bottom line. The previous 2 bids, each bid had just happened to suppress him. For some reason, a feeling of defeat grew in Xiong Bailing's heart. Could it be that he, who had been in business for generations, was not as good as a bandit leader? At his side, the old shopkeeper's face was full of defeat, and he reminded him, "Master, you can't go any higher. If you go any higher, then there won't be any profit." Xiong Bailing thought for a while, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. The Xiong family earning money from this bid was a small matter. Opening up a trade route was the important matter. He decided to fight it out with the bandits in room B4. "Just give me this price." Xiong Bailing made a hand gesture and made up his mind to cut off all means of retreat. He gritted his teeth and said, "Bandits don't care about stolen silver, but there's no need to lose money to steal business from me." At this time, the courtyard had quieted down. It was the third bid and there was no one else participating. Everyone's gaze was focused on the Lingnan Xiong family and room B4. Although eunuch Huang and Guozheng had doubts in their hearts and glanced at Fan Xian, they still didn't pay enough attention to it. After all, this was only a small bid. Perhaps Fan Xian just wanted to fish for some profit. As long as it didn't hurt the Ming family or their interests, it was fine. The 2 officials each took out a leather envelope from the 2 rooms and silently entered the flower hall. Everyone waited anxiously for the result. Although this bid was not the biggest or most profitable of the 16, The people in the courtyard had already begun to feel something strange about room B4. Everyone wanted to know whether room B4 was here to fight for the bid or was the imperial envoy using it to raise the price. Room B4, Xia family, 370,000 liang win. The transport company official responsible for announcing the result stood on the stone steps and expressionlessly sang out the result. His singing was very moving. Even the last wind swayed and sounded like he was singing on a stage. The courtyard immediately sank into a deathly silence. A moment later, everyone seemed to wake up from their shock and let out a heaven-shaking cry of surprise. 370,000 liang. However, to sell wine to the north, if it was calculated according to previous years, this would certainly be a loss. The Lingnan Xiong family had bid 300,000 liang, which was already a desperate bid. Who would have thought that they would still lose to room B4? However, with this, the merchants also understood one fact. Xia Qifei of room B4 was definitely not a shill used by the imperial envoy to raise the price. He was truly going to fight for business with them. For a moment, everyone didn't know whether to be happy or sad. At this time, a muffled sound came from the room of the Lingnan Xiong family. It seemed that something heavy had fallen from a chair to the ground. Everyone stared at the room with lingering fear. The master of the Xiong family, Xiong Bailing, climbed up from the ground. With great difficulty, he picked up a cup of cold tea and poured it into his stomach. Panting, he said, "That bastard, F***ck, to bid 370,000 liang. These bandits are indeed bandits. Even when doing business they are still so bandit-like. You guys win." Fan Xian sat in the grand wooden chair in the hall with his head slightly lowered. He was not happy with this price. It was indeed too high. Originally, the first two bids had been very beautiful on Xia Qifei's side and just enough to beat the Xiong family by a head. This last bid had cost him an extra 70,000 liang of silver. No matter how much money he had, he couldn't afford to spend it like this. He sighed in his heart, but he knew that the bidding was certainly not Xia Qifei's decision. He had placed a few crafty Ministry of Revenue officials in room B4. They were experts he had secretly asked for from his father in Jingdo. However, it seemed that those officials had overestimated the determination of the Lingnan Xiong family. In a moment, a brocade box had been brought out from room B4 and handed over to the flower hall for inspection. It was indeed a full 150,000 liang of banknotes issued by Taiping Money House. The seal was not fake and the old man was not deceived. At this moment, everyone knew that the person sitting in the quiet room B4 was a merchant among bandits. A bandit among merchants did not give any face when it came to bidding. It only knew how to use silver to smash people. Furthermore, the other party did indeed have this much silver. However, no one knew how many more bids the bandits in room B4 were prepared to take. The following development of the situation made everyone, other than the Ming family, feel hopeless. The leader of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei, perfectly displayed the style of a bandit. Using the banknotes as a knife and the exquisite bidding as a fist, he forcefully carved out a bloody path in the midst of the crowd of merchants. Amidst the singing of the officials on the stone steps, the brocade box was endlessly handed into the flower hall. People seemed to see countless beautiful banknotes dancing in the air while Xia Qifei held a large knife and clamored lasciviously, "Who has more money than me?" 4 hours had passed. Other than missing an unimportant small bid, Xia Qifei had taken 4 bids in a row. Among them were the 3 bids that had originally belonged to the Cui family's northern route. Not only had he killed Xiong Bailing until he fell to the ground, he had also killed the Chuanzhou Sun family until their faces were deathly pale. The other merchants were even more frightened out of their wits. They thought to themselves that they had not come today to take bids, but to see bandits kill people. It was only now that the merchants regretted not accepting Fan Xian's initial proposal. If they split it up, there were still 10 more major bids. Even if the Ming family was eyeing them covetously, they would still have a chance to take a bite. They would rather shed all pretense of cordiality and fight with the Ming family than face off against the bandits in room B4. This was the Jiangnan merchant's biggest feeling today. Fan Xian sat in the grand wooden chair with a calm expression and spoke casually with Xueqin. In reality, he was jealous of Xia Qifei in his heart. He thought to himself, why didn't this kind of cute game of using silver to smash people into the arena and make it so easy for him? Eunuch Huang and Guizhang had already shaken off the shock of a moment ago. They met each other's eyes with a not quite there smile. They were thinking the same thing. Fan Xian, where did all this silver come from? The Minister of Revenue in Jingdo was probably not clean. The 5th bid had begun. This was the northern route glassware that had originally belonged to the Cui family. The door to room B4 was pushed open again. Another brown paper bag was handed out. At this time there were already no merchants willing to play with this bandit, so they were all quiet and only hoped that the bandit would eat his fill earlier. It was at this moment that the door to room A1, which had been unusually quiet, was pushed open. For some reason the Ming family had made their move early. We don't need to win the bid, but we need to drag it out. At least drag it out until the end of the day. Ming Qingda closed his eyes to rest and said to his son beside him, "The other party's momentum has already been formed. We need to be careful and give ourselves enough time to respond tonight." Ming Lansher was silent. He knew that his father was also beginning to worry about the seemingly bottomless amount of silver in room B4 and was preparing to raise it at night. Ming Qingda didn't open his eyes, but he was thinking about the bandit in room B4. Why did he make him so uneasy? That Xia Qifei, why did he look so familiar? The bandit in room B4 robbed the monthly tickets. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 365. First of all, a correction. The day before yesterday it was B6. Yesterday it became B4. I made a mistake. Thank you for your reminder. Hearing the news of the Ming family bidding, Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. It was as if he had not thought that the other party's response would come so quickly and with such shrewdness. In reality his heart was still calm. This was something he had expected. The Ming family was not a pig waiting to be slaughtered. Although the matter had happened suddenly, someone as scheming and deep foresight as Ming Qingda would certainly have a better response. Eunuch Huang and Guizheng heard this news and their spirits rose. Their long-sitting buttocks finally moved forward a little and listened with anticipation to the sounds in the courtyard. Only Xueqing remained calm and collected as he tasted the tea in his bowl. This was already the 5th lot. It had never been one of the Ming family's goals, but they had chosen to bid at this time. Their goal was to stand out in this silent scene and suppress the arrogance of Xia Qifei and his group in room B4. More importantly, they were using a scoundrelly method to stall for time and slow down the process. Thus, this round of bidding seemed to be exceptionally boring, even boring. It was far less intense than the first round, when Xia Qifei and the Xiong clan of Lingnan clashed tit for tat, and it couldn't even compare to the previous rounds. The price the Ming family bid was very low. There was not a hint of sincerity to be seen. However, Ming Qingda did not care about this. With a face full of smiles, he watched his son and the shopkeepers of the clan drag out the time. This round of bidding took up a few quarters of an hour. When the Ming family calculated, they were as inexperienced as a beginner. When they called out a price, they were as shy as a virgin girl. When they handed over the leather bag, they were as inconvenient as a toothless old woman. In any case, they dragged it out as long as they could. From the master to the accounts room, they cooperated very well. It made everyone wait anxiously, but they could not find any problems. The transport company official responsible for announcing had already begun to stand on the stone steps and yawn. This 5th lot was not over yet. Xia Qifei's price had been suppressing the Ming family by a large margin, but the 3 rounds of bidding had not ended. No one could jump to the next round. The surrounding Jiangnan merchants began to chat and drink tea. These old foxes could all see what the old Ming master was planning. They knew that within today, they would probably only be able to open the 5th lot. The sun in the sky moved slowly but surely toward the west. The Ming family's speaking movements were slow and sloppy. A little bird landed in the middle of the courtyard and looked curiously at the people around it who were yawning and chatting. It did not seem to understand why everything in this courtyard seemed to be moving in slow motion. The Ming family was in no hurry. The Jiangnan merchants were in no hurry. Eunuch Huang and Guizheng were in no hurry. Governor Xueqing was even less anxious. He didn't know if the robbers in room B4 would go crazy when they encountered this kind of slow simmering skill. However, under everyone's careful scrutiny, Fan Xian hid the anxiety between his brows. His heart was clear, and he was full of praise for the Ming family's ruthless skills and shameless methods. The sun gradually descended toward the west, dragging the shadow of the palace treasury main door like a girl's dress. The little bird, which had not even found a blade of grass on the stone steps, raised its head and looked around. Full of hidden bitterness, it cooed a few times and flapped its wings to fly away. A gong rang out. The firecrackers that represented the successful end of the palace treasury bidding did not explode because the 3rd bidding for the 5th lot had just ended. Xia Qifei had once again arduously defeated the Ming family and obtained the right to sell glass in the north. At this moment, the first day of the palace treasury's New Year opening bidding was about to end. The merchants in the courtyard all let out a breath and stretched. They wiped away their cold sweat with some lingering fear. Fortunately, the Ming family had made a move in the end and forcefully dragged out the time. Otherwise, given the aura of room before at the beginning, who knew how many drops of soup would be left from the fat and overflowing 16 lots of the palace treasury? Eunuch Huang and Guizheng met each other's eyes and smiled gratifyingly. Xia Qifei's move had indeed surprised them. Fortunately, in the end he had dragged out the other party's aura. Presumably, the Ming family would make proper arrangements for tomorrow's matters tonight. Fan Xian sat on the chair and lifted the stage over the high wall of the large courtyard. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the smear of red on the horizon, but he could no longer see the setting sun. The courtyard began to clear and seal the lots. The banknotes and tools that the merchants had brought in did not need to be taken out. For one it was for convenience and another was for safety. Tonight, Jiangnan Road, the Overwatch Council, the transport company, and the Suzhou government would work together to guard this palace treasury courtyard tightly. It could be said to be the safest place in the world. The soldiers began to put seals on the rooms in the corridor and the outside of the flower hall. The merchants had already come out. They stood in the courtyard in groups of 3 to 5 and chatted. When they saw the old Ming master and young master Ming come out of room A1, everyone quickly went over to greet and bow. Everyone's voices were low, but the focus of their discussion was naturally the bandit in room B4. Xia Qifei's face was heavy. He led his subordinates to stand under the wall closest to the main door of the palace treasury courtyard. It was a patch of darkness. As everyone discussed, they looked in that direction. Looking at the group of people in the darkness, they thought of the bandits' methods earlier and felt a growing fear in their hearts. At this time, the 4 officials in the main hall also walked down. Greetings, Eunuch Huang. Greetings, Sir Shui. Sir Fan Jr., you have to leave some food for me. All of a sudden, the merchants rushed forward and surrounded the 4 high-ranking officials. They greeted each other and complained about their troubles. It was a very lively scene. Fan Xian couldn't resist smiling. Looking at the angry Xiong Bailing of the Lingnan Xiong family, he comforted him and then teased, "There are still 11 lots, what are you all in such a rush for?" The representatives of the various families cried out bitterly in their hearts. Of the remaining 11 lots, the Ming family was determined to win 8 of the bundled lots. How could they have any food for themselves? Fan Xian sighed again and said, "There are too few lots. There will always be people who won't get their turn. This is the rule of the court. I can't do anything about it." Hearing these words, everyone immediately thought of Fan Xian's initial suggestion. Hearing him mention the word rule, their eyes involuntarily lit up. Xiong Bailing suddenly chuckled and said in a low voice, "This rule, isn't it set by people?" These merchants had not fought for any benefits today, so they couldn't help but feel a certain thirst for tomorrow's lots. Ming Qingda, who had been watching coldly from outside the crowd, furrowed his brows. He knew the imperial envoy was secretly urging the merchants to fight for shares with the Ming family. He laughed coldly in his heart, but on the surface, he smiled faintly and glanced at Eunuch Huang without anyone noticing. Eunuch Huang understood and smiled slightly as he interrupted, "Everyone, I also think the same." Everyone couldn't help but feel happy. They thought that even the representative of the palace had agreed to the suggestion of dividing the lots. It looked like this matter would succeed. Unexpectedly, Eunuch Huang then sighed and said, "Unfortunately, the rules of the court are here. No one dares to move on their own. This matter can only wait until I return to the capital and go to the Empress Dowager and the Emperor to argue for everyone. I dare say that next year will certainly be better than this year." Everyone paused. Their faces were very awkward, but in their hearts, they were cursing this eunuch for only saying pretty words. During this time, Fan Xian was talking to everyone, but in reality his attention was on the Ming family. He found that the old Ming master's state of mind was still clear despite the sudden change. His emotions did not seem to have been affected at all. His judgment of matters was still fast and accurate. He couldn't help but feel a little worried. Since he wanted to force the Ming family to lose their heads, it looked like he would have to add more bargaining chips. All of the work of sealing the treasury had finally ended, and the defenses had been set up. The main doors of the palace treasury courtyard were slowly pulled open for the second time that day. The fresh air from the street poured into the courtyard and lifted everyone's spirits. They decided to go back at night to discuss things and come back tomorrow to fight for the lots. It had already come to this. Who cared if it was the Ming family or the Fan family? They had to steal some business to do. At this time, the large merchants had already heard from Fan Xian's few words the intentions of a certain faction in the court. They wanted to target the Ming family. There were benefits to lure them and power to guide them. The merchants began to drool over the Ming family that they had not dared to directly clash with. The leaders of the large families, led by the Lingnan Xiong family and the Chuanzhou Sun family, met each other's eyes and smiled strangely. Amidst their laughter, they decided to eat together at Jiangnan restaurant that night. Everyone was secretly discussing how to steal the Ming family's lot. Of course, they were paying attention to the movements of the old Ming master. They found that the old Ming master was talking to the imperial envoy. One old and one young, the two of them had smiles on their faces and were incomparably intimate. Officials and merchants were actually both extremely hypocritical professions. Naturally, they would do this kind of superficial work, so no one was surprised. Just as they were about to leave, they saw the imperial envoy gently wave his hand and call over Xia Qifei and his group, who had remained in the shadows. The merchants all stopped their steps and looked curiously at the scene in front of them. Fan Xian's expression was calm as he gazed at Xia Qifei with a faint smile. His two hands were in front of his body and made a gesture that only the two of them understood. His mouth said, "Sir Xia, today you are in the limelight." Xia Qifei smiled and raised his hands in a greeting in all directions. It is all thanks to everyone's modesty. No matter how much the merchants hated him, they knew that he was, after all, a figure in the underworld. It was best not to offend him face to face. Furthermore, they could clearly see that this person was Imperial Envoy Fan Xian's trusted aide. Thus, they kept their faces and replied with a few words, saying that Sir Xia had not made a name for himself for 10 years and had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. Ming Qingda narrowed his eyes and looked at the enemy who had suddenly appeared in front of him. He suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "Master Xia, why are you suddenly interested in doing business?" The scene became silent. Xia Qifei lowered his head and only slowly raised it a moment later. Looking at the master of this generation of the Ming family, he said with a not quite there smile, "Although I have been on the Jianghu for a long time, my family has been in business for generations. When it comes to my generation, no matter how bad it is, I have to carry on my father's dying wish." The corners of Ming Qingda's eyes furrowed even more. He tiredly asked, "So, Master Xia is also a family of merchants? I didn't know you were a merchant from all over the world. Perhaps I once had a friendship with your father." All the merchants looked at this scene with curiosity. Hearing this conversation, they were also very curious about what Xia Qifei's family originally did. Xia Qifei gazed calmly at Ming Qingda's face that often appeared in his nightmares. An unknown emotion welled up in his heart. A moment later, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He quietly said, "Of course there is friendship. My father is your father. Does Master Ming not know him?" The people present did not quite understand these words. Xiong Bailing began to unconsciously dig at his ears. Ming Qingda was slightly startled. He looked at Xia Qifei in front of him and did not speak. Although Xia Qifei didn't know why the imperial envoy wanted him to reveal his identity ahead of time, standing once again in front of the Ming family had been his strongest wish these years. Today his dream had come true. It made his emotions surge with emotion. However, he still maintained his calm on the surface. It was just that his right hand, hanging by his side and hidden in his sleeve, was trembling slightly. He gazed at Ming Qingda and said in a light but faint voice, "Big brother, we haven't seen each other for a dozen years. Do you not recognize Shaoqi?" Xia Qifei was the 7th young master of the Ming family. He was the rumored 7th young master who should have inherited the Ming family business but had mysteriously disappeared in the end. All the merchants present looked at Xia Qifei in disbelief. It was as if they were looking at a fierce ghost crawling out of hell, a monster that should not exist in this world. How was this possible? Although no one dared to discuss it, everyone could guess that it was the old matriarch of the Ming family and the old Ming master in front of them who had killed the 7th young master. How could he still be alive and become the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits? Ming Qingda gazed in a daze at Xia Qifei in front of him. He stared at that face for an indeterminable amount of time. Suddenly his body began to tremble. He finally saw a trace of a familiar shadow on this face. It was that young and inexperienced little brother from back then, that thin body that had been viciously beaten by him with a whip, and that face filled with hatred and the joy of revenge. Father. At this moment, Ming Lansher's heart was also filled with incomparable shock and fear. He looked like an idiot at Xia Qifei, the legendary uncle. He found that his father's body was already swaying and quickly went to support him. In Ming Lansher's view, this palace treasury courtyard was like a haunted house. He could not stay for long. Supporting his father, who seemed to have aged a great deal in an instant, he led the members of the clan out of the palace treasury courtyard. The merchants present were still staring at Xia Qifei with faces full of shock and quietly discussing something. When the Ming family walked to the front door, unexpectedly the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, abruptly shook off his son's support and forced himself to stand straight, turning around. The master of the Ming family's face was slightly pale, but he used his powerful self-control to recover his temporary calm. He gazed at Xia Qifei in the courtyard and calmly said, "Master Xia must be joking. My poor seventh brother unfortunately died of illness a dozen years ago. Please do not say such a joke to provoke my heart." The merchants were silent. They knew it was fortunate that the old master of the Ming family had stopped and turned around to say these words. Otherwise, if, in their shock, they had revealed an opening and allowed this news to spread without anyone from the Ming family to refute it, the situation would become even more difficult to control. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and looked at the old and tired master of the Ming family on the stone steps. He sighed in his heart and said, "What a pity, I admire you." To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 366. After the 25th, the monthly tickets will be doubled. Brothers and sisters who still have tickets, help me keep some. When the time comes, smash them. Thank you here and then go eat. I wish everyone a happy weekend. Eat oysters at night, haha. For Fan Xian, it was a pity that Ming Qingda did not lose his composure in the face of the sudden attack he had hidden for a long time. His admiration was for the same reason. Xia Qifei's true past was definitely one of the most secretive matters in the world. The Ming family had no idea that the seventh young master was still alive in this world. After he had been saved by the old master of the Jiangnan water bandits, he had become the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits. The Ming family even had some business dealings with the Jiangnan water bandits. If Ming Qingda had known of Xia Qifei's identity earlier, he would probably have long thought of a way to deal with him. Facing the seventh young master who had appeared like a ghost, the current master of the Ming family was only slightly startled. At least he recovered his calm on the surface. No wonder he was the wealthiest man in the Qing kingdom, the head of a large Jiangnan family. Although the Ming family had deep connections in Jingdou, it was impossible for them to know this. Even Fan Xian had only begun to focus his research on the Ming family after he had drawn up this year's plan last autumn. Only then did he find a sliver of a crack he could use in the iron plate that was Jiangnan. Of course, this was all thanks to the current head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, Yan Bingyun, and Sir Yan Jr.'s ability to summarize, analyze and meticulously track down information. It was this normally quiet high-ranking official of the Overwatch Council who had successfully dug out Xia Qifei's most secretive past. If Yan Bingyun had not helped Fan Xian take care of his foundation beforehand, Fan Xian's trip to Jiangnan this time would not have been so relaxed and confident. The group of people from the Ming family suppressed the shock in their hearts and silently left the door of the palace treasury manor. They walked out of the street that had been sealed off by soldiers. A carriage had long since come up to receive them and drove toward Ming Garden outside the city. No one knew how chaotic Ming Garden would be tonight because of the news of the seventh young master's sudden resurrection, or how the Ming family would respond. Fan Xian stood at the door of the manor and watched with a slight smile as the Ming family's carriage disappeared into the dusk. Seeing this, the officials behind him and the Jiangnan merchants couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. They felt that the slight smile on the corners of the imperial envoy's lips was incomparably cold and cold-blooded. Everyone couldn't resist glancing at Xia Qifei a few more times. It was as if they still could not connect the head bandit of the Jiangnan water bandits with the seventh young master that the Ming family had thought dead many years ago. They knew that with the imperial envoy as a backer and the legendary will from back then, there would be a fight over the Ming family's enormous fortune. Although the Ming family could completely deny it, the matter would eventually become intense. What kind of benefits could the Jiangnan merchants gain from this? Xiong Bailing of Lingnan and Sun Jixiang of Chuanzhou looked at each other. They were both thinking for tonight's gathering at Jiangnan restaurant. Should they invite another person? However, today's cards had been flipped too suddenly. The Jiangnan merchants could not make up their minds for a moment. Furthermore, to extend a hand to Xia Qifei at this time would be too rash. Besides, they didn't know what this seventh master Xia was thinking. Fan Xian did not know what Xia Qifei was thinking. He only knew that in the action manual that Yan Bingyun had drawn up for him, the Jiangnan trip should be split into two groups. Attacking the Ming family, then the other merchants had to be appeased. Xia Qifei had taken so many bids today and was already faintly forcing the Jiangnan merchants to unite and begin fighting for food with the Ming family tomorrow. Once Xia Qifei's identity, which could not be verified, was revealed, the Jiangnan merchants should be able to smell the conspiracy and opportunity within. Danger and opportunity had always been a pair. Merchants had an innate sense of adventure. Thus, Fan Xian gave Xia Qifei a hand signal. He saw Xia Qifei walk in front of Xiong Bailing and Sun Jixiang with a face full of smiles. Under their startled gazes, he quietly said a few words. The merchants all laughed lightly as if they were talking about a very interesting topic. Then everyone dispersed and left the street. Fan Xian turned around and said a few words to Xueqing and Eunuch Huang. He glanced at Guozhang and then left first under the protection of the tiger guards. As he left, he turned his head back and swept a glance out of the corner of his eye. He saw that although Xia Qifei did not leave in the same direction as the merchants, he knew that there would be a chair for Xia Qifei at the Jiangnan gathering in a moment. The Ming family was at a disadvantage. The Ming family was being furiously attacked by Fan Xian. However, as representatives of the Ming family's backing, Eunuch Huang and Guozhang did not seem to be excited or concerned. The two of them smiled slightly and bowed to Governor Xueqing and quietly said a few words. Xueqing furrowed his brows slightly and shook his head. He put his hands behind his back and climbed into his sedan chair to leave. At this moment, only Eunuch Huang and Imperial Censor Guozhang remained in front of the large courtyard. They watched with narrowed eyes as the Jiangnan governor's sedan chair gradually turned the corner. Their expressions immediately became ugly. Guozhang coldly said, "This governor does things too carefully. What is there to be afraid of in a joint petition?" Eunuch Huang chuckled and said, "Sir Gua, how many people in this world can shoulder righteousness like you? Last year, in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice, you did not fear the nobility and interrogated Fan Xian. The palace greatly admired this matter." Guozhang laughed self-mockingly and said, "Don't mention that matter." Eunuch Huang calmed down and said in a quiet voice, "Xueqing has always been deeply trusted by the emperor. In officialdom, this person is the most slick and difficult to fathom. This time, Fan Xian secretly sent Xia Qifei out to seize the bid. You are the imperial censor, you can write rumors, but after all, there is no way to hold on to solid evidence. Xueqing will certainly not participate in this. My question earlier was just to test his attitude. You also know that the place we are looking at is not in Jiangnan." Guozhang smiled slightly and replied, "Naturally, officials are not allowed to do business. This rule has been set by the court for many years. Which official has actually followed it? Even if Xia Qifei is Fan Xian's pawn, if we grab solid evidence and bring it to the court, I'm afraid the emperor will just laugh it off and not care about it in the past few years. Now that Fan Xian is heavily favored by the emperor, there will be even less of a problem." The two of them met each other's eyes again. Guozhang continued to smile and said, "The Jiangnan matter will eventually end in Jingdou. Eunuch, where do you think Fan Xian got so much silver? Although we can't find out how the silver came to Jiangnan, we can at least find out if the room that should have been filled with silver has been emptied out by the Fan family at this time." Eunuch Huang chuckled darkly and said, "Those masters in the palace were thinking this way. Let the imperial envoy do as he pleases in Jiangnan. In a few days, the capital will probably start investigating the Ministry of Revenue." Fan Xian stood in Hua Garden's study with his body leaning forward. He looked at the little hand on the desk holding a brush and writing seriously. Among such an old child, the third prince's handwriting could be considered pretty good. It was graceful but not gentle. The structure was strong but round on the outside. It was contained but not revealed, strong but not released. Judging a person by his handwriting, Fan Xian knew that this prince, who always liked to wear a shy smile on his face, was not a simple character. However, he was still young and there were many things he could not see clearly. Other than dealing with Jiangnan matters, Fan Xian's most important job was to fulfill his duty as the Imperial College's Sai and be responsible for the third prince's studies and cultivation. As for the third prince's studies, a few days ago, Xueqing had kindly invited a famous Jiangnan teacher to come and teach the third prince. In the end, he had been kicked out of the door by the third prince. After Fan Xian returned to Suzhou and heard of this matter, he flew into a rage and led the third prince to personally go to the Jiangnan Academy to apologize to the teachers. With kind words, he invited the teachers back into Hua Garden. He then locked the third prince in his study and viciously slapped his palms a few times. When the ruler landed on the palm, the sound was crisp. Particularly when it landed on the third prince's palm, the ruler felt even more arrogant and proud. By the time Xueqing heard of this matter and rushed over, the slap had already been finished. The governor looked at the third prince, whose eyes were red but was still obedient, and couldn't help his heart being shocked. Although Fan Xian was the prince's teacher that the emperor had personally appointed to actually hit him, this Sir Fan Jr. was indeed extraordinarily daring. After this matter was announced, the Jiangnan scholars all praised the imperial envoy as indeed the light of scholars. To be so respectful to his teacher, Fan Xian's already good reputation became even more beautiful. What everyone didn't know was that Fan Xian teaching the third prince had nothing to do with the emperor. It was purely because he didn't want to fail Yi Guiping's solemn request. "Your Highness, it's almost done," Fan Xian said in a gentle voice as he gazed at the third prince, who was bent over the table and writing seriously. "Teacher, there are still 2 more pages." The third prince turned his head in astonishment. It was as if he had not expected Fan Xian to be so gentle today. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Your palm still hurts, right? You can make it up tomorrow. Rest a bit today and go out to play." He rubbed the third prince's head. This action appeared a bit too intimate. Even if he was a teacher, logically speaking, he should be sitting upright and serious. Yet the third prince liked this. Perhaps the children who grew up in the palace all had some contact deficiency, whether it was physically or mentally. The little guy smiled and bowed. He then ran out of the room. He ran so fast that no one knew what fun things were waiting for him in Ming Garden. Watching the third prince's departing figure, for some reason, Fan Xian's heart felt a bit empty. He began to miss his brother far away in Shangjing in northern Qi. Wang Qinian had written to say that Xixia had recently been busy, with the help of the Overwatch Council, consolidating the Cui family's routes in the north. However, it was impossible for a 7th leaf to leave the country. It was indeed difficult for a young man like him to manage such an important matter. As for why the third prince had left so excitedly, Fan Xian understood the reason. It was because he had the third prince pester Haitang these few days. Given the prince's status, if he wanted to enter the Tianyi Dao sect, presumably he would not be too opposed. Even if this matter was not handled properly in the future, it would be beneficial for the third prince to learn some martial arts from Haitang to protect himself and forcefully put together a master-disciple relationship. A knocking sound came from outside the study. Fan Xian woke up from his thoughts and raised his head to look. He saw Shi Chan standing with his head turned to look into the garden. His fingers were unconsciously knocking on the door. He couldn't resist smiling and said, "Come in, what's there to see?" Shi Chanli forced a smile and walked in through the door. "Teacher, to have the third prince learn martial arts from Haitang is truly something only you would dare to do. She is, after all, the saint girl of northern Qi. If this matter gets out to the capital, I'm afraid it will cause a great deal of trouble." "What trouble?" Fan Xian smiled. "The emperor told me to take the third prince to Jiangnan. Of course, I have to teach him with all my heart. As for things like martial arts, Haitang is more suitable than me." The two of them no longer discussed this topic. Shi Chanli said with a pained expression, "Today Yang Jimei came again and insisted on inviting me to dinner." Yang Jimei was the largest salt merchant in the area between the 2 rivers. The Hua garden that Fan Xian lived in had been given to him by this salt merchant. Fan Xian knew that this salt merchant was close to Xueqing, so he always gave him some face. Hearing Shi Chanli say this, he knew that although Yang Jimei had not earned much this year, he had great hopes for the palace treasury next year. He smiled and said, "This garden is his family's. If he wants to come and see, of course we can't refuse. He knows that he can't curry favor with me, so he can only curry favor with you. Let him eat. In the future you will also be doing business in Jiangnan. It will always be good to know a few local tyrants." "Where is he preparing to invite you?" Fan Xian asked. "Jiangnan restaurant." The highest class restaurants in Suzhou were Jiangnan Restaurant and Zhiyuan Restaurant. When Fan Xian had first arrived in Suzhou, the Jiangnan officials led by Xueqing had chosen Jiangnan Restaurant to welcome him. Presently, the Ming family's Zhiyuan Restaurant had been half bought and half scared into the hands of the third prince and was prepared to be turned into a branch of the Baoyue brothel. If Yang Jimei wanted to invite someone, it could only be a Jiangnan Restaurant. Fan Xian thought to himself that his question was indeed unnecessary. He thought for a moment and then said, "Today the Jiangnan merchants have also decided to meet at Jiangnan Restaurant. The Ming family has to deal with the matter of Xia Qifei, so they probably won't send anyone to attend. Yang Jimei insisted on inviting you to dinner." He certainly wants to use this opportunity to build connections with the royal merchants. Give this opportunity to Yang Jime. When the time comes, bring him to the banquet. Presently, everyone in Suzhou knew that the head shopkeeper of the Baoyue brothel branch, Shi Chanli, was actually Fan Xian's confidant. With Shi Chanli acting as a middleman, the royal merchants would certainly be happy to accept Yang Jime's arrival. Of course, Fan Xian's thoughts were not just to return a favor to Yang Jime and Xue Qin. He also had other arrangements. At the banquet, keep your ears open, Fan Xian said. The Ming family is not present, so the royal merchants will not avoid you. Perhaps they will purposely use your ears to send their plans for tomorrow to me. Shi Chanli nodded. In reality, he was still a bit nervous. Should I keep an eye on Xia Qifei? After staying with Fan Xian for a long time, Shi Chanli, who usually only knew how to study the books of the saints, had also become used to viewing everything in the world through the eyes of a conspiracy theory. These words clearly showed that he did not trust Xia Qifei. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Relax, Xia Qifei is a smart person. He won't be stupid enough to betray me at this time. This will not benefit him at all." Shi Chanli smiled with slight embarrassment and then asked, "Sir, do you have any words that you want me to bring to the Jiangnan royal merchants?" Fan Xian lowered his head and thought for a moment. "Just say that I support them to do as they please. Even if they completely empty out this year, I will compensate them next year." He raised his head and warned, "Of course you have to dress up your words a bit. Don't say it too plainly." Shi Chanli accepted the order and was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something Yang Jime had mysteriously mentioned earlier. After thinking for a bit, he still opened his mouth and said, "Earlier Yang Jime said that there is an organization in Jiangnan called the Juanshan Conference. Its power is somewhat mysterious and unfathomable. Please be careful, sir." Fan Xian thought for a bit and felt that the name Juanshan Conference was unfamiliar. It seemed that there was no record of it in the Overwatch Council's files. He furrowed his brows and said, "Mysterious does not necessarily mean powerful. I understand." After Shi Chanli left, Fan Xian's brows furrowed even tighter. An organization that even he didn't know about, what exactly did it represent? He called out. Gauda, who had been standing guard outside the door, walked in with large steps. Nowadays, Fan Xian was doing things less and less without avoiding him. One reason was to purposely use the tiger guards to show sincerity to the person on the dragon chair in the capital. The other reason was to try the words, moving people with emotion, and see if it was possible to truly turn these powerful tiger guards into truly one of us. He had Gauda call over the head swordsman of the 6th Bureau. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said to the subordinate, "How many people are there in Suzhou?" He was asking about the number of assassins and swordsmen of the 6th Bureau. The emperor had only moved a few tiger guards over. They either stayed by Fan Xian's side or stayed behind the third prince. They could not be moved. Most of the assassins of the 6th Bureau were under the Shadow's lead. They were all over Jiangnan fighting guerrilla warfare against the group of aces sent by Dongyi. For a time, the number of people Fan Xian could move became somewhat inconvenient. The 6th Bureau still has 7 people. There are quite a few people from the 4th Bureau of Inspection stationed in Suzhou, the subordinate replied in a low voice. Presently, the head of the Qinian unit, Wang Qinian, was in northern Qi, Deng Ziyu was in Jingdou, and Su Wenmao had been left behind by Fan Xian in the 3 workshops of the palace treasury in North Min. Thus, this person was currently Fan Xian's most direct subordinate. Coincidentally, he had also come from the 6th Bureau, so he was the person in the Qinian unit most skilled in defense. "Don't move the people of the 4th Bureau," Fan Xian sighed and said. "They are not good at fighting and killing. If there are any losses and Yan Bingyun knows that I used his people indiscriminately, given his personality, I really don't know how he will react. After I return to the capital, I will be criticized." Gauda and the member of the Qinian unit who were listening to the side both laughed. The subordinate asked with confusion, "Sir, what are we doing today?" "To protect someone," Fan Xian said in a low voice. Fan Xian said in a heavy voice, "Take the 7 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau and hurry to Jiangnan restaurant. Find Xia Qifei and tell him directly that these are the guards I gave him. At the same time, tell him not to be suspicious. Once the palace treasury bidding is over, I will immediately take them back." No one knew whether or not Fan Xian had placed spies by Xia Qifei's side. At least on the surface, other than a few old officials of the Ministry of Revenue, the Overwatch Council did not monitor Xia Qifei's every move. This was the way the two sides interacted. Thus, Fan Xian had decided to move people to Xia Qifei's side. He had to at least give a word or two of explanation. The subordinate furrowed his brows and said, "Sir, if they are all moved over, what about you and the third prince?" Fan Xian glanced at Gao and smiled confidently. "Naturally, Sir Gao will worry about my safety. Your mission is to ensure that before the palace treasury bidding, Xia Qifei himself is not harmed in the slightest." Hearing these words, Gao gripped the hilt of his knife and bowed. The subordinate did not continue to ask questions. He calmly accepted the order and prepared to open the door to make arrangements. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and suddenly said, "Be careful." The old matriarch of the Ming family seemed to be in a very bad mood. She didn't even take a sip of her daily nourishing pigeon soup. She sent it back to the little kitchen untouched. After the Ming master and young master returned from Suzhou, they went straight into the back garden and had not come out. The uncles and nephews of each branch also received their orders. With faces full of worry, they passed through the beautiful corridors and pavilions by the lake in Ming Garden and hurried toward the old matriarch's courtyard. The servant girls with heads full of confusion watched as the fourth master, who only liked to walk his bird, the third master, who only liked to take concubines, and the sixth master, who only liked to practice wrestling with martial artists and win lotteries. They walked hurriedly and with unsure expressions. It was usually difficult for the men of the Ming family to gather together. At this time they had all arrived. They couldn't help but be confused. What had happened? For a moment, the entire Ming garden was enveloped in a tense and uneasy atmosphere. The speed at which rumors spread was always faster than the mail system that the Qin kingdom was so proud of. Before long, all of the servants in Ming Garden learned of a startling piece of news. It turned out that at the palace treasury bidding in Suzhou, an enemy who dared to oppose the Ming family had suddenly appeared. That enemy was the legendary seventh young master of the Ming family who had died many years ago. Back then, the previous master of the Ming family had loved the seventh young master's mother the most. In his will, it seemed that most of the property had been left to the seventh young master with a wretched fate. However, after all these years, the Ming family had long become the property of the eldest branch. Now that such a person had suddenly appeared, what exactly would happen? Everyone calmed down. The wrinkled old matriarch looked coldly at the men of the Ming family in the hall. A great anger surged in her heart. These men were so flustered at such a small matter. After 100 years, how could she peacefully hand over such a large family property to them? Sister, with such a rumor suddenly appearing, it's no wonder the children are panicking. Sitting beside the old Ming matriarch was the old master's concubine. Because she had fawned over the main wife well, she had lived until today. She looked at the old Ming matriarch's face and said in a trembling voice, "If that Xia person is really Shao Qi, what do we do?" To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 367. This chapter was difficult to write, so it was later. Tomorrow's chapter would probably be even more difficult, so the update would also be slightly later. Since you know it's just a rumor, then what is there to panic about? The old Ming matriarch screamed angrily. The old woman's voice had become sharp because of a strange sense of humiliation. It was as terrifying as the tip of a knife scratching across a piece of porcelain. The great aunt sitting by her side was scared stiff. She quickly and obediently sat back in her chair, not daring to say another word. The old Ming matriarch was easily jealous and ruthless. Back then the old Ming master had only taken 3 concubines. Of the people of that generation there were only 2 women left. Fortunately, the Ming family had a thriving male population. Not counting Xia Qifei, who was currently drinking in Jiangnan restaurant, there were a total of 6 men in the 2 branches with children. Ming Qingda was the eldest son of the eldest branch and the current master of the Ming family. The 3rd and 4th brothers were both born of this great aunt. Seeing their birth mother being yelled at by the old matriarch, these 2 did not feel very comfortable in their hearts. However, the old matriarch had accumulated power for a long time, so no one dared to argue. As the eldest son, Ming Qingda had to come out and say a few warm words of explanation in this situation. Unexpectedly, the old Ming matriarch did not even pay attention to this nominal master of the Ming family. With a cold face she said, "Remember all of this. The 7th of the Ming family died a dozen years ago. As for the current master Xia in Suzhou, if he wants to use the rumor from a dozen years ago to cause trouble, the Ming family will not tolerate him." Ming Qingda had been rebuffed, but he still wore a smile on his face. Warmly he said, "Mother, naturally no one will believe such an absurd rumor. However, what if the court wants to believe it?" These words were spoken very directly. Xia Qifei was Fan Xian's pawn. If the court power Fan Xian represented wanted to use this opportunity to take over the Ming family's enormous property and power without bloodshed, this kind of situation would be the most dangerous. The old matriarch blinked her slightly muddy eyes and said with disgust, "Just because that Fan official says so? Does the court not listen to reason?" Ming Qingdao thought to himself, when has the court ever been reasonable? However, in the past, the court had always stood on the side of the Ming family. Thus, the Ming family of all reason and the hardest fist had always been the Ming family. If there was a disagreement within the court, the Ming family's fist had already endured the pain and cut itself off. This reasoning was probably even more difficult to explain. He smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, please tell me." Xia Qifei's momentum was ferocious. Looking at the appearance of the bidding today, he had brought a lot of money. Furthermore, he had the support of the imperial envoy. As for how the Ming family would respond, it would require the old Ming matriarch to draw up a plan. She did not directly answer Ming Qingda's question. She only stared at the Ming family disciples in the yard and said in a cold voice, "The situation today is not the same as in the past. A few days ago, I had Lan Shi go to each branch to see you uncles and have you be more well-behaved. Today I will repeat it again. At this time, do not bring any trouble to the Ming family. If you want to walk your birds, then walk them at home. Chase all those hooligans who only know how to wrestle out of the garden. Also, no one is allowed to spread this matter. If I hear anyone gossiping behind my back, be careful that I don't pull your tongues out." The old Ming matriarch's words were hurried and angry. She actually began to cough. The serving girl behind her quickly gave her a gentle pat on the back. Beside her, Zhang Sun Ming Lanshi quickly and respectfully handed over a bowl of tea. The Ming family disciples in the yard all bowed down, not daring to disobey the old matriarch's orders. Ming Qingda glanced at his mother. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. The old Ming matriarch laughed coldly in her heart. When her son did things, he lacked decisiveness. She always had to be the bad guy. She took a shallow sip of tea and indifferently opened her mouth to say, "Tomorrow is the second day of the bidding. As you all know, the imperial envoy is targeting our family. The next 8 lots will be bundled into 2 batches. It looks like the price will be much higher than in previous years. There is only one night. If we go to the money house now to issue the tickets, I'm afraid it will already be too late. At this time, you brothers should go back and gather up the private money in your rooms and hand it over to the accounts in a bit." Once these words came out, the men of the Ming family in the yard were immediately dumbfounded. Not being allowed to walk their birds and wrestle was just a temporary boredom. Anyone could endure it, but why did they have to use their pitifully small private money to travel to and fro? Every year when the palace treasury opened the bids, the family would always prepare enough silver. If the prices of those 8 lots were ridiculously high, then they could just not fight. Why was there a need to work so hard? The court would not set an upper limit. Who would know how much silver had to be stuffed in? These men were born with a golden spoon in their mouths, but they did not have the right to inherit. They only knew how to enjoy life. How could they know the true meaning of the palace treasury bidding for the Ming family? Behind it was hidden the power struggle within the court. Hearing the old matriarch's words, they unconsciously did not want to agree. The 6th master of the Ming family was younger and liked to wrestle, so he was braver. Gathering his courage, he said, "Mother, us brothers have never been able to participate in the family business. We all live on a monthly basis and each have a large family to support. Even if we have some private money, if we use that pitiful amount of silver to fill in, I'm afraid it won't be of much use. It would be better." Before he finished speaking, a teacup had already been smashed to pieces in front of him with a crisp sound. The 6th master jumped in fright and his body trembled. Looking at the old matriarch's expression, he was so frightened that his legs weakened and he knelt down. The old matriarch looked at him faintly and coldly and said, "Pitiful silver? Do you think I don't know how much you've gained from the public business these years? Your in-laws are all famous rich people in Suzhou. Before, I pretended I didn't see it because you are, after all, the flesh and blood of the Ming family. According to the ancestors' rules, you are not allowed to take over the family business. Seeing that you are pitiful, it is fine to gain some silver, but what is the situation now? All of you kneel and listen to me." After these words came out, everyone, including Ming Qingda, knelt in front of the 2 armchairs. The old matriarch's voice was like a venomous snake's tongue, making one shiver even though it was not cold. If the big tree collapses, will it be any good for you monkeys? I will say it clearly. If the bidding tomorrow is not successful, even if the Ming family can hold out for a few more years, in the end, we will only be reduced to scattered ashes. At this time we cannot be allowed to retreat. We can only advance. At this juncture, don't even think about hiding. The great aunt looked with heartache at her son in the court. She leaned over and comforted, "Sister, don't be angry, they know what to do." The men of the Ming family in the court were frightened. They pounded their heads like garlic and repeatedly admitted their wrongs. It's good that you know your wrongs. The old Ming matriarch slowly leaned back in the chair. Her eyelids seemed to close slightly as she said, "In a moment you will all go back. No matter what method you use, before dawn tomorrow, hand over the silver to the accounts room. Each room 200,000 liang, old 6 150,000 liang." After these words came out, the second, fourth and fifth princes did not have any objections. Although they still felt heartache, the third prince was not going to let it go. He straightened his neck and said, "Mother, why does old 6 only have to pay 150,000 liang?" The old matriarch glared at him and said, "Old 6 is the youngest. These 2 years he has been in contact with the garrison. He likes to wrestle and spends more silver. As the older brother, why are you fussing with him?" The third prince snorted heavily from his nose and said unhappily, "Have I never spent silver on a daily basis?" In reality, everyone knew that this was the old matriarch feeling bad for her youngest son. However, anyone could say this except for the third prince, because he was the great-aunt's own son. The great-aunt saw that the situation was not good and repeatedly signaled to the third prince with her eyes. Recently, the third prince's silver had not been easy to use, so he stubbornly refused to lower his head. The old matriarch flew into a rage and scolded, "You only know how to spend silver in the brothel and even buy those whores back home. Is there any reason to spend this silver?" From the wretched experience of Xia Qifei and his mother, it could be seen that the old matriarch had a very persistent dislike for some of the hobbies of men. "What about Big Brother? I am the eldest wife." Ming Qingda knelt on the ground and looked at his brothers with a slight smile. "Naturally, I have to put in a bit more effort. I accept 500,000 liang." Hearing the eldest brother say this, the brothers could not say anything more. The Ming garden family gathering immediately dispersed. The brothers quickly left the garden to gather the silver. Although they did indeed have a lot of private money hidden away, to gather this amount in one night was indeed very difficult. As the third prince of the Ming family followed his brothers outside, he cried about being poor and hoped that his brothers could help. At this time, everyone had their hands full. Furthermore, in front of the old Ming matriarch's strict orders, no one dared to be careless. How could they care about him? Time is too tight. At this time, the great aunt had also returned to her own courtyard. In the old matriarch's courtyard, there was only one branch of the eldest wife. Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly and said, "The imperial envoy's move was too sudden. It didn't give us much time to react." The old Ming matriarch glanced at her son and sighed. "Today in the palace treasury manor, your reaction was not bad. At least you managed to buy one more night of time." Ming Qingda smiled bitterly and shook his head. "One night is too short. Furthermore, looking at Xia Qifei's actions today, I'm afraid he still has a lot of strength left. The battle tomorrow will probably be very dangerous. Even if the brothers can gather enough silver, it will only be an extra 1 million liang. Perhaps it still won't be enough." To the side, Ming Lansher was flabbergasted and said with self-doubt, "Father, in the past 8 lots, 40% of the fixed silver was a share of 5 million liang. This year we had already prepared an extra 20%. In addition to the 1 million liang that the uncles raised, is it still not enough?" Ming Qingda smiled bitterly and said, "The biggest problem is that the imperial envoy knows that we have to win these 8 lots, so Xia Qifei can randomly call out prices. Furthermore, production and sales are all internal matters, so they can do it at a loss." Ming Lansher sighed. He was a smart person. He would not ask why the Ming family had to win these lots. Putting aside the so-called power problem, Dongyi alone would demand that they win all 8 lots. Otherwise, the price that Dongyi had to pay for the palace treasury's production each year would probably far exceed a few million liang. "Is there any news from Taiping Money House?" The old Ming matriarch, who had been silent for a while, suddenly opened her mouth and asked. Ming Qingda calmly replied, "They also did not expect it to be like this and did not prepare enough. Xia Qifei's silver was all transferred out from Taiping Money House. Presently they can only give us promissory notes, but they can't issue cash notes. Tomorrow we must have cash notes, As you know, they also have their fears. Earlier, their shopkeeper had already sent word. At most, he can give me another 300,000 liang. The old Ming matriarch understood why this was so. Once a money house's banknote contract was issued, it had to be honored. Xia Qifei had already issued a large amount of banknotes. Correspondingly, there were very few that dared to issue more. The money house had to guarantee that there would be cash to pay. This matter concerned the most important problem of the money house's reputation. Of course, given the relationship between Dong Yi and the Ming family, if it was not under such a tense situation, Taiping Money House could completely issue fake banknotes. However, the risk was too great and this method was too crude. Once they offended Fan Xian, the Palace Treasury Transport Company could use the Xia family's banknotes and the Ming family's banknotes to play the most shameless move of making a run. So much silver. Even if Taiping Money House was an immortal, they would not be able to move it to Suzhou in such a short amount of time. If they did, Taiping Money House could be considered destroyed. Although Taiping Money House had close economic ties to each country, normally speaking, no country's internal palace would do such a ruthless thing. However, the person hosting the palace treasury bidding this time was Fan Xian, the one who was the most unclear of relationships and the most ruthless and tyrannical in his actions. Taiping Money House would not take such a risk even if they were beaten to death. The courtyard immediately sank into a deathly silence. The hearts of the third generation of the Ming family began to feel nervous. Would they really have to watch the seventh Ming master steal away the Ming family's business tomorrow? After losing the right to market the palace treasury, the Ming family was just a landlord with the most land and could be slaughtered at any moment. This terrifying reality made the old Ming matriarch's brows furrow even deeper. She suddenly thought of a name and coldly said, "Recently, has there been anyone from Zhaoshang Money House who has come?" Ming Lansher shook his head. "They know we are a large customer of Taiping Money House. They probed a few times and probably knew they couldn't move us, so they backed off." The old Ming matriarch unconsciously nodded her head and said, "It looks like it is not as I imagined." Because the accounts of Taiping Money House had always been in the hands of the old Ming matriarch, Ming Qingda had always strongly advocated a relationship with Zhaoshang Money House. Hearing his mother's words soften a little, his heart leaped with joy, but his expression was calm. They should be trustworthy. If there really is a problem, it shouldn't be this way of doing things. The old Ming matriarch furrowed her brows as if she was thinking about a difficult problem. After a long time she said, "Send someone to Zhaoshang Money House." "No, don't send anyone. Lansher, go personally. See how much cash they can pull out tonight." "Yes, mother." Ming Qingda smiled slightly and then asked hesitantly, "How do we deal with Xia Qifei?" The old Ming matriarch's face became cold. "I don't know that person, you don't know him, and the Ming family doesn't know him. Since it is so, how do we deal with him? Don't get involved in this matter. Don't let the imperial envoy take the lead. Right now the imperial envoy hopes that the Ming family will react fiercely, so we should be increasingly calm." Ming Qingda bowed deeply to the ground and sighed in admiration. Mother is wise. Ming Qingda had to deal with the matters of tomorrow's bidding and go to the account's house to keep an eye on his brothers. Ming Lansher had to go into the city to find the mysterious Zhaoshang Money House that was rumored to have a Dongyi background. Thus he did not stay long in the courtyard. After bowing he retreated. The old Ming matriarch watched her son and grandson walk out of the little courtyard. Her eyes abruptly changed from the previous sternness to the present tiredness. She raised her pinky weakly and knocked on the armrest of the chair. The personal serving girl moved closer to the old woman's lips. The old woman closed her eyes. Her pinky remained raised for a long time. She did not put it down, nor did she speak. It was as if she was weighing something important. "Shaoqi?" At this moment, a dark image seemed to rise in the old woman's tightly closed eyes. In the image, a woman with a face full of foxy charm was tossing and turning happily under a familiar man's body. She was smiling boastfully and proudly in front of her. The image changed. The woman had given birth to a child. She held the young infant and swaggered around Ming Garden. Her laughter was like a silver bell, floating and floating all the way to the sky. The old woman suddenly opened her eyes filled with an ice-cold intent. Her pinky moved agitatedly, bending slightly. In this instant, she thought of many things from the past, such as when those heavy staffs landed on the woman's body, the beautiful scene of blood flying. That woman had been forced to the bottom of the well by her. The snowflakes on that day had also floated and floated all the way to the sky. That woman's body had probably long become dry bones. When a mouse crawled on top, it would only make unpleasant sounds. It would never be able to make a silvery bell-like laughter, right? After that old bastard died, she had the final say in the family. That woman had died, but it was not easy to kill the child she gave birth to. After all, he was the flesh and blood of the Ming family in name. Fortunately, Qingde was ruthless and used a whip to beat him every day. Finally, the child could not stand the humiliation and pain and ran out of Ming Garden one morning. Perhaps that child would never know that at that time, she had been watching him coldly from behind the door. Perhaps that child would never know that she had long prepared a killer and was waiting outside Ming Garden to send him down the dry well and reunite with his mother. But, how come that child did not die? Why did he not die? A glimmer of anger flashed through the old Ming matriarch's cold eyes. The fingers that had been perked up and slightly bent finally gently rested on the back of the chair. At the same time, her slightly dry lips opened slightly. She said in a quiet voice to the serving girl by her lips, "Please, Sir Zhou." When the old Ming matriarch finally made up her mind, her son and grandson were walking side by side. Ming Lansher gazed at his father with a face full of admiration and said, "You are saying that grandmother will definitely make a move against that bastard?" "What bastard?" Ming Qingda's face was full of a warm smile. "That is your seventh uncle. Although he is our enemy right now, he is still your real seventh uncle." Ming Lansher smiled self-mockingly. He suddenly furrowed his brows and asked, "Killing seventh uncle can indeed completely end this matter, but how will the imperial envoy side react? No matter how powerful the Juanshan conference is, they can't rebel." "Your grandmother is old." Ming Qingda sighed. From the beginning of this matter, the method she used was wrong. Ming Lansher shook his head. Ming Qingda suddenly smiled and said, "However, her mistake does not represent the Ming family's mistake. If your seventh uncle is not so lucky this time, it may not all be a bad thing. Don't worry too much, I know what to do." This ostensible master of the Ming family smiled coldly in his heart. Just let the Juanshan conference, which he could never control, clash with the Overwatch Council. Someone as astute and farsighted as him naturally had a way to clean up this mess. He just didn't know what method he would use. "Sixth uncle has gotten a good one again this time," Ming Lansher suddenly said mockingly. Ming Qingda lovingly patted his son's shoulder and explained, "Old people always like their youngest son the most, of course it has to be her own." While the Ming family was in a mess and at the same time, there were many mice eyeing each other covetously and thinking of trampling each other to death, the youngest son of the Ming family, Ming Qingqing, the present commander of the Jiangnan Water Bandits, Xia Qifei, the secret inspector of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Jiangnan, was standing on the highest floor of the Jiangnan restaurant in Suzhou. He stood by the side of the building and gently stroked the wooden railing. He gazed thoughtfully at a place outside the city. That place had once been his home, a home he had not returned to for many years, Ming Garden. The gathering of the Jiangnan merchants had already ended. Although no one had set down any specific rules, looking at the greedy eyes of the Lingnan Xiong family and the Chuanzhou Sun family, Xia Qifei knew that the commissioner's plan had already worked. Tomorrow the Ming family would not only have to face his own attack, but they would also have to face attacks similar to the alliance of the Xiong and Sun families. Merchants always had to eat meat. When they were too hungry, who cared whose meat it was? Xia Qifei narrowed his eyes slightly. Ming Garden was too far away. Standing on the tall roof of the Jiangnan restaurant, it was impossible to clearly see the lights in it. Today was the most unrestrained day he had ever lived since he was lucky enough to survive in this world. He finally said his name proudly in front of everyone, Ming Qingqing. Compared to this, the pleasure of using silver to smash people, leaving his identity as a Jianghu person, and standing on the stage of the Qing kingdom were all not much. As long as he could say his real name, it was like slapping that evil old woman of the Ming family in the face. This pleasure of revenge covered up everything else and made Xia Qifei feel incomparably grateful to Fan Xian. Even when Fan Xian had sent 7 swordsmen, he did not feel a glimmer of unhappiness. He was intoxicated and hurt by everything that had happened today. It was to the point that this ambitious and ruthless person on the Jianghu did not notice that a few strange people had appeared on the opposite street. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.